We should be good now.
Like no such thing as a diamond rapier.
We're fucking good.
Rapiers are made in construct display, and there's you can't really melt down diamonds.
Huh?
So essentially, you can't melt down
forge.
diamonds, but you can reinforce weapons with diamonds to give them more durability and more damage.
I don't think it's more damage. I think it's more durability.
All right.
Well,
I'm going to keep an
either
eye
way,
on
you
my
can
RAM and
do
hope to
nice
God I don't
stuff with
fucking
that,
max
so.
out again.
Shoot nice stuff.
Hey everyone, it's me, Shoe Nice here, wasting another fucking day of your life.
Hey, Shoe Nice here. I'm gonna eat my ram sticks live on Twitch.
I mean, yeah, that's probably something he would do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I wish Shoe Nice was dead. He's a real asshole.
Probably is.
We can only hope and pray.
Huh, there's a village beneath us. There's cherry blossom trees?
Yeah.
And giant pine trees. Oh, I love it here. Whatever biome we're
If you
in.
want to go
We're in
downstairs,
like 3
down.
different forest biomes.
If you want-
but-
if you wanna
So
go to
far,
the
I
surface
have
level.
not maxed out ram.
If you want to go to surface level, remember if you take the minecart, the tunnel that used to go to Oniontown, there's a water spout that goes down.
Yeah, that's the only way to get down right now.
I mean, there's other ways to get down, but that's the safest, the most reliable way.
Yeah.
Terry has a way where he just jumps, does a 360, and gets on there. But
I mean, half the time Terry
Well,
dies.
there's also waterfalls here.
I mean, yeah, the waterfall is what I'm talking about.
There's a lot of fun stuff here, Grim. I'm sure you'll love it.
Lots of fun things.
Me, Jeff Kaplan from the Overman team.
Alright, well, time to give me creative.
No.
But
Grim, you already
Not
had
getting
creative.
Nobody's
No,
getting
'cause
creative.
I need to decorate this castle, the evil castle.
yeah,
Grim,
Me
you-
and Benny.
Oh yeah,
I mean that's going to be in non-creative mode.
Grim. If you need any wool, I have several hundred stacks in my slime place.
As a matter of fact,
What I need
Ririk,
is
are you still in
artistic
creative?
freedom.
He already had it removed.
No, I had Paul get me out of it.
Alright.
Yeah, man.
Paul was paying attention to the server.
Also,
Oh, sorry,
if
I
you
was
need
too busy
draconian
dying.
dust.
My whole computer just decided,
You know.
fuck it. Can't believe I lost all my music, and I lost all my settings for chatty, so now I have things popping up telling me that
Why
other
is there
people
an
are live.
X?
Why is there a what?
Jamal, did you throw yourself into my furnace multiple times?
No.
Okay. There's
Oh, I
blood in my
pushed a
furnace.
polar bear in there, noob.
Was it one polar bear? Because that made fucking 355 millibuckets of fucking blood.
Alright, I'm putting on some music and hope to God I don't fucking die.
I need to
We'll see.
research what's best. They changed like the materials.
Where is the bookmark that I made?
I am
This
now
is
on
the
the surface
best
with all the
stream
cherry
I've ever done in my
blossoms.
whole
Is that a
life.
zombie in daylight?
That'd be called a husk, actually.
No, he's green. He's a villager, and he's in the cherry blossom forest.
Yeah, I probably want to avoid that guy.
Alright,
It's kind of sketchy sounding if you ask me.
got some music.
Pink daffodil.
Wait, so I can do. Hammers are
cherry
two
blossoms,
heads,
I think.
right?
Good news, noob. The Lich Wand does work on the Lich.
Alright.
Good.
Lilac.
Why are you just eating my keyboard? Hey, no stop.
What does this place kind of have like a Viking village theme?
What place?
Fermenting barrel. This village near us.
I know what you're talking about, the NPC village.
Yeah, we're all the NPCs though.
I wouldn't
Oh,
say
yeah,
it's
I'm
really
also
like...
just gonna say right now, before the stream really starts, if I blue screen or crash again, I'm coming back drunk.
You even have money for alcohol?
Blue
I
screen.
have
Blue
plenty
screen.
of
Blue screen.
alcohol. I've had alcohol since before I was on.
Hey, a berry bush. We could use berries. We'd be like
Oh,
age
yeah.
vampires.
Where did I leave all my shit before I hope for your creative? It's junk.
And that would be another dead Lich.
Nice.
There we
Looking good.
Oh, no message this time. Whatever. I guess it's not as special if you do it twice.
Stone head. Stone.
What was I working on before I started helping you?
An aneurysm machine, I think.
Oh no, I was working on making a coffee machine.
Oh, what cheetah's
Kill
machine?
the diamond iot.
You get?
No, iot. It looks like in order to make it, you need to use a diamond axe or bow, pickaxe.
Diamond Arya Stark.
Oops.
Diamonds.
That's not what I wanted to
Diamond,
do.
diamond, and then the other word, AIOT. Looks like it's supposed to be some kind of
Diamond
super tool
AIOT.
weapon.
Oh, it looks like it'd be a multi-tool.
Yeah.
That's pretty
You
cool.
can give your character boobs? What?
Oh no,
Oh, yeah.
Benny just If there's anything left of you, that's good. Don't dabble with that.
What
You'll
is
fall into a
cursor?
pit.
Hey dude, what is cursive vanishing?
Oh, you see,
When you die, it disappears.
Oh, so I shouldn't
what is
keep
that?
these then. Fuck that. Not high.
you probably
Hello?
unenchant them.
Huh?
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Obama.
And also, dude, I found the village drops a shit ton of gold armor when he dies.
No, it's gold armor.
So whose team should I join?
All of us. I mean, I guess ours. I mean,
Actually, the
Mastaonion?
teams don't really matter.
They do, actually.
No, they
It's
do.
like a
just
reality show.
for claiming blocks for building. That's it.
Well, Benny, I think you should join me because I'll pay you.
I mean, do you
They're not on the list.
exactly.
What the?
Alright, I'm just gonna blow up this place because there's no point in keeping another fucking lich tower around. Well,
Just
Well, it's been
about
fun.
all. There we go.
let's just use up the last of this TNT. That's only 12 blocks. Let's get the fuck out of here.
Ugh.
1 second.
I was kind of hoping
Yeah,
to have a
sure,
more
thanks.
smoother stream start, but that kind of didn't work.
Alright, and is that another fucking lich tower? I swear to God.
Good news, everyone. I found hemp.
Hemp, you gonna make some weed? Smoke some weed?
Hemp is weed, Jamal. Please.
I know the Twitch app is clunky, but it's probably the easiest way to do this.
Is Oniontown still using the acid pool for?
Yes.
Yeah,
But it's blocked off, so it shouldn't hurt you this time around.
the pool is closed due to AIDS.
Like the dumbest. No, fuck you, Grim.
Why didn't we just...
It's not in the acid pool.
Why didn't we just move the...
It's still in
Warp
the acid
point.
pool.
No.
Because
Yeah.
that requires me to do things.
I warped there and I wasn't in the acid pool.
I just burned to death.
Maybe anything on
No, you don't... You don't drop your stuff when you die, dude.
Yeah, I'll change the warp point.
Sorry
Here
to
we
say.
go. I'll do it.
Thank you. What took you forever?
Sorry, my computer fucking blue screened.
No, I mean before.
My computer still blue screened.
No, before.
I mean, I didn't die before then. I was already here.
Well, is it true your computer blue screen is...
What?
What was that?
Is it
Bruce?
Paul's cheating.
Oh.
So, Grim, a word of advice for you. If you see any sort of, like, horrible dark forest in the, Twilight Forest, that has, like, giant, fart gas lines coming out of it,
Yeah.
don't go there.
Alright, there's a new Oniontown warp. This time with 100% less death.
Here, test it.
Here,
Yeah.
get the first test, come on.
I don't see why this could have been used in the first place.
Turns out Jamal was fucking around and just teleported you straight, like, put the warp point
So what's
right on
with
the
all
edge
this
of
like
stuff.
weird gas lights?
What?
Like there's these yellow
All
like
the little piss
control-
essences.
Yeah.
That's Terry's mod pack. He pisses everywhere and it lights up the house. Really complements the feng shui.
Never
And
mind.
judge the interior of Noob's house. Awful.
Wow, I mean, come downstairs and say it to my face, you bitch.
Nah, it's still awful.
Better than Jamal's house. Clusterfuck.
You say that as I get stuck in a door. Shut up.
So, Benny, can I hook you up with the supplies to start to work on my thing?
Awful.
Really? I mean, maybe he
Sure.
wants to do his own thing.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Let him ease in. Let him ease in.
I can't, there's no lube.
Hey, what's that?
Eh,
Where's Kip and Benny? I want to
Look
show
at
them
my-
my house real quick.
Diamond axe,
I'm
sword,
in my
pickaxe,
house.
shovel,
Come to
up,
me.
and hole.
I need to
Don't
show
go,
you.
Jamal. Jamal's
You
a
know,
dangerous
you don't
fucking
have to
thing.
be extra to impress someone.
Thank you,
That's
Grim.
kind of a
I
weird
want to show you
tool.
guys what
It
this
is.
mod offers,
Yeah.
and I know you guys would love it.
Okay.
Also, that pull is really looking bad.
Although,
Don't
you know, going down to the slums, I kind of want to protect
Farkas,
myself.
if you want to build further out of the town, let's go.
No one here is going to mug you.
You say
I mean-
before a
I'm
mob
gonna mug
spawns
that
in.
motherfucker. I can't wait to. Hey, Grim,
Here.
could you bring Rear to
Come
my
to the
house so I
only-
can mug him?
The only safe house in the area.
God,
That's
was
actually
safe.
nicely decorated.
Oh. Oh.
Honestly, I wouldn't trust
Look at
Jamal.
these.
Last time I went to visit his house, he fucking booted me out and then
I
threatened to kill
love
me.
this.
What? Where are you?
He was shouting something about cicadas.
TPA.
Oh. Ah.
How do I TPA?
I don't think the server has TPA.
He doesn't.
It's beautiful.
Where is he?
What's
Where are
beautiful?
you?
In my house in Oniontown.
What is what?
Where I always am.
Where are you?
But Benny, look at this. Bam.
What's
Oh. That's so cool.
Look at my
What's happening?
cabinet full of beef jerky.
Kitchenware.
Where'd your
Right.
skin go?
Oh. Well, I have my skin.
You're Steve for me. Also, the server is lagging already.
I'm not Steve.
No, he's not.
I'm
I'm not
not
dropping
Stu.
I'm not still.
This is a picture
Okay,
of
I'm sorry.
bucket.
Oh no, that's actually my baking pan.
Okay.
Don't throw my eggs. I need those. Piece of shit. By the way, PvP's on.
I don't see what that has to do with
Ow.
anything.
Wow, Jamal, what the hell?
Yeah.
Dude, I just
You
realized
hit
we gotta set
Benny.
the fucking small code zoo again.
Get out of my house.
Stay
Dude,
inside his
remember-
house.
You remember the small code
You,
zoo?
you basically just
I do, yes.
ran into my kitchen, went into my refrigerator, took my eggs, and started throwing them at me. And as soon as you say that, Farkas says, I see you have a lack of eggs in your house. That'll change soon.
God help us.
Fucking open up my oven as well. Get out of my house. Fucking, this isn't a house party.
He just invited us.
Yeah.
Jamal
come
brings
on, man.
people in, then yells at them. Story of his
Yeah,
life.
Fucking open up my oven and now it won't close.
I mean, that sounds like a personal problem.
It's
It
closed now.
changed Tinker's Runner so much. I don't know what they really make now because apparently everything's good now.
If you need eggs, I got eggs.
What do you mean?
I know you
everything's
got
good now?
eggs.
Or like everything's decent. Like apparently
Jamal. Can I have
King
some
Slime's
diamonds?
pretty good now.
No.
I don't know what it does
Grim,
though.
get out of my
I need-
fucking house.
Benny, if you need diamonds,
Hang
you can
on,
come to my house.
not yet.
I gotta find one of these fucking swamps already. Jesus Christ. I think I found it. There appears to be one of those
Grim,
giant
I know you're
trees
looking
covered
for
in
where my
vines.
secret chest is now.
If you don't already know at this point, I think we all should.
Didn't he tell you that it was in a fucking bedrock place? There's no way in hell you get into it.
Home
In the bedrock
vault.
floor.
I encased my new secret chest in bedrock. So good luck, fuckers.
What is this?
Jamal's cheating. He's not giving us a true experience.
Yeah, cheating, cheating.
Yeah, how
Cheating.
dare I want my stuff to be
Cheating.
protected from your thieving fingers?
Oh, but our stuff can't be.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
we're not
steal
cool
from you
enough.
guys.
Yeah, you are.
You already did.
Ah, Jamal. Help! Ah!
You just jumped
Ah!
into boiling iron.
I see him burning.
Well,
Tried to
Trying
create
to create
multiplayer.
multiplayer. That's amazing.
Rick, add that to the death count.
Are we... What?
So I mean, fruit. There's perfect. There's
Yeah, but
perfect
that's-
smog coat brand tools we can make.
Really? Explain.
Evil infused iron.
Oh, how do we do that?
When held, creates an aura of evil that brings misfortune to the wielder.
Oh, that's fucking sick as fuck.
Misfortune to the wielder.
I don't know what it does, but it's black and gold.
Why are there parrots inside the McFundle?
Just leave them.
Oh, those are the employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, they make explosion
Oh.
sounds. Don't worry about it.
Alright, well, I'm going exploring. I need to go mining, motherfuckers.
God damn, I don't know what to make. If I make that
Where's the
cobalt
mer-
and like
mol-
adderite with a
oil?
little bit of.
You have hemp! You have hemp!
Oh boy.
Things take a while.
The my weed now.
Don't
Bitch.
touch my weed, man.
Touch my weed,
I
man.
need that for later.
Shit's great for my glaucoma.
Oh, I just died.
So I have to be up at 10, so I can't rebound for too much longer, unfortunately.
I don't know
Same.
what to tell- I don't know
I'm
what
gonna
to
be
tell
on
you.
later, even though I shouldn't be. But I'll hate tomorrow.
Wait, I thought I was supposed to die with all my stuff. Oh, there we go.
Alright, well now that's all set up, I think about lockout.
Oh, that was quick. Hey, been live for 20 minutes and Grim's already leaving.
It's midnight. Oh,
Jamal,
sleep my
I just gotta get
Minotaur.
up in like
You're implying we're doing
6
this for the
hours.
stream. We're just doing this to play the fucking game, dude.
Yeah, I know.
So, Fruit, how was it like being stretched out 5 times your
Ow.
What?
Minotaur?
The sex.
Your asshole
Well,
is
Graham-
gaping.
Oh, you played that game too?
Yeah.
Oh god, did you actually?
what?
Wait, what?
I'm proud of you, Grim.
What game?
Anyways.
I mean, you can really.
This is a
Quarry in this mod.
Yeah, quarries are in this mod. Quarries are in every mod.
Yeah,
It's
it's
core,
just they
there's
get
never really that-
gradually worse as time goes
Yeah,
on.
but to say.
Quarries seem like they're a good idea at first, and then you actually get them, and then they're fucking terrible.
Are they
Why
terrible?
would you say they're
Is this
terrible?
a pig spawner?
Because
It
you
is,
find
yeah.
out later on there's no point in having a quarry when you just have a hammer that can smash things.
Which I'm making right now.
Nah, basically I'm trying to
So,
build.
how do we make
I mean,
evil
it's all for
infused stuff?
the sake of
I don't know.
automating things. Each mod has
Evil
a different
infused
purpose.
ingots is made by with extra utilities, which is made.
I'm googling
Actually, I don't
it.
know how to fucking make it.
Need
Encha-
to
oh, wait,
find the
oh
fucking
god,
quarry.
you have to enchant iron with other stars.
Yeah, we gotta start figuring out how to cheat in Nether Stars.
That's the idea.
The first thing we have to do is you have the uncrafting table, yeah?
I do.
So we gotta figure out a way to cheese in Nether Stars.
That's
we
the
did
idea.
before. Or just you make a really overpowered weapon and then kill the wither
That's
repeatedly
also
with
the
it.
idea.
Step 1, though, we gotta find another fortress and get some fucking wither skulls.
Okay.
Step 2, I'm gonna need to borrow some of your bricks so I can make my furnace and have a cool furnace to myself. To smelt
You
all
can,
the
you can use mine if you want to for a bit while I'm doing this.
350.
Well, you have to give me a
21.
second, noob. Because Minecraft crashed again because this fucking game just loves to not work properly.
Have you had your computer completely
I love-
blue screen yet?
Yeah, I did actually. That was the first day.
Actually, the scary thing about my computer just crashing a few seconds ago was it didn't even blue screen.
Why is
Like,
Java
all
such
my
a piece
monitors
of
just
shit?
turned off. Like, I guess I overloaded my RAM. Even though I've been running the game perfectly fine all day.
Maybe Java just shouldn't be a piece of shit. Simple as that.
You know what's sad? Fucking Java version of Minecraft isn't even the main version anymore.
Yeah, that is sad.
What kind of liquid is that?
It's stinky.
That's not
It's a Mountain Dew
normal water.
lake.
Ow. Ow.
Hey, Anya, are you sure? Because
I'm
I
gonna
can't
burn.
see the.
Why do you stick your claws in my chest? What the fuck am I up to get?
So, noob,
Like, really,
also,
Jesus.
noob, that's called
Oh.
playing to them.
Oh, that hurt so bad.
You
Ow, my
wanted
other
a
hand.
cat.
Me
You
too,
wanted a
that's-
cat.
I just want you to be calm for a little bit. I know I just got home. But
So, noob, good news. We can apparently make demon metal.
demon metal sounds metal as shit.
What kind of bands comes with that recipe?
Hey, don't worry about it. Look, I'm just going about business, you know?
Going about business.
Hmm.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I
I
did
just
like it better with
realized
the
all those
Japanese.
people that followed me like 6 or 7 months ago when we played vanilla Minecraft might come back.
I'd be really confused.
That's fortunate.
Because I actually got a message from somebody saying play more Minecraft, and I told them no.
I told him no.
You're gonna just think, Jamal, next you're gonna start streaming
For sure they'll
Pokemon.
come back and watch me.
Hey, Jamal, you should start streaming Pokemon again in Minecraft, then you'll get famous.
Yeah. Nice
Please
Schemo
don't.
Kyle joke there.
What?
Nothing. So, Kyle started doing his Christmas live streams,
Yeah, you mentioned.
and, god damn it, fucking bees. I've
Yep,
made it
fuck
a
bees.
yearly tradition, and I'm just saying this because I know he won't ever hear this, but, I make it a yearly tradition
Fucking
to
stream.
get into whatever game they're playing and fuck with them. And they were playing PUBG the other night for like 4 or 5 hours. And I tried to stream snipe them for like a solid 4 or 5 hours, and I never got into their game. So I
So
haven't
new.
popped my yearly tradition cherry yet.
Weird question, Joel. Do you have a bunch of cobblestone you're not using for anything?
Probably just go check my chests.
Okay.
I'm
I'm
going
gonna
with the
take that off
mindset
your
of
hands.
anything valuable I have, I'm keeping in the fucking bedrock vault.
I mean, I just sort of assumed.
Are you making super cobblestone again? Super
Yeah, I'm gonna make a portal
cobblestone?
to. I'm gonna make a portal to the deep dark again.
Oh no!
There's like
Deep
mushrooms and stuff in the nether.
Yeah, there's new nether
dark.
biomes, by the way, Penny.
Can we not do the deep dark, please?
Well, no, but the deep dark is if you just want to have infinite ores forever.
The deep dark monster is coming after
I mean, Noob,
me.
think about the possibilities. If you can give yourself light, you're basically invincible there and able to mine forever.
What mod was the quarry from?
Industrial craft.
I can't really seem to find it, even when I
Big
type
black
in
monster is coming after you.
Okay. Oh, I didn't bring any fucking arrows. God damn it, I'm an idiot.
Oh wait, do we still need fucking unstable ingots? I really hope not.
Oh boy, unstable ingots.
You remember
God
that.
damn, I fucking hate modded Minecraft so much.
We might not need
Dude,
that
where's
anymore,
those
is it?
bees?
Check your asshole, they're flying out.
It's hip the fuck bees,
Bees?
noob. It's hip the fuck bees.
Be scary.
Think of that Oprah Winfrey gift.
You get pretty terrible with the bees.
For a second, I thought you were gonna say that Oprah Winfrey quote, "It's hip the fuck bees."
Oh,
It's hip.
Noob, check to see if unstable ingots are still a thing.
Spoiler alert.
Dude, I'm getting okay.
oh.
Spoiler alert, what? What?
Oh no, I'm kidding. Oh no, fucking the cat's
What?
attacking
Spoiler what?
me.
Man, don't
Spoiler
get me
cast,
after
what are you gonna
that.
really spoil for us?
I don't think I see it.
Jamal, you didn't transfer Madoka. Or mommy.
Not yet. I was gonna do that before my computer crashed, but we'll focus on that later. I requested Paul to put it in a chunk far away.
Big black monster is coming after you.
If we're to make a deep dark portal, you just need to make compressed cobblestone, which is made of. Wow, it's actually really easy to make.
Yeah, it's just a shit ton of cobblestone.
Look, they made it a lot easier. It's only the deep dark portal is now only 2 stacks instead of like 300 stacks.
So, Noob, is there an item called Portal to the Last Millennium?
I like that Yu-Gi-Oh movie.
Portal frame, portal charm, portal or what portal, deep dark portal. I don't see one.
Deep dark purple. Purple.
I'm gonna
having
have a
strokes.
stroke. Please help me.
I don't know what's wrong with me. I just can't stop stroking.
I wonder what the portal gun does, like the Rex portal gun does. It we have to, every time we use that we have to scream I'm Pickle Rick.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the
Sorry,
last
Jamal.
things Terry told me today was he was in Discord with me before we went to go play WoW forever. He goes, I'm Pickle Rick, and then he left. So
It was division.
Wait, hold on a second.
What?
I think I may have found a an extra cheesy way of doing something. Let's bring it.
They're cheating, Jamal. Ban them. They're cheating.
Okay, please, please, I actually don't want to get kicked.
Grim, you know he'd actually do that, right?
Yeah.
Remember,
I can assure you that if I was a moderator on the original Minestick server, one of you would have been banned.
it would
I know
probably
you
be
do
me.
like to abuse your powers. I mean,
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
does anyone here have a Ender Pearl? It's in Blaze
Yeah.
Powder.
why?
I need an Ender Eye or something.
Okay, come over to my fortress.
Jamal, make that your AFK screen.
I can make plenty of things by AFK Screens.
Oh, the thing I sent in
Like,
Discord.
come to where? Yeah, the fortress.
Oh, apparently I can
Is it?
fix my... Also, dude, do you want a Scepter of Twilight?
I mean, sure, yeah.
I have 2 now, so whatever.
Give me the magic books.
There's no
If it's
sword
actually
each
this
other.
easy to make Ender Stars, I'm actually not gonna tell you because it's really cheesy. I'm pretty sure it's not gonna let you do it though, because
Maybe don't say that out loud then.
Listen, I paid $30 fucking for the server. I don't want you guys to stop playing in 2 days.
I mean,
I'm done.
yeah.
I'm
See you
kind
guys
of bored.
later. It's almost like you've done so much times. And see you guys later.
You guys want to play Overwatch?
Well, yeah.
Just Overwatch.
Jamal killed himself.
I just felt my
They haven't
fucking nicotine withdrawal headaches come back.
So
Well, if I
noob,
scream
what
really
is
loud, what would happen?
so noob, text me.
You get banned from the Discord.
Noob, message me really quick. What's going on with
No,
this?
you'll. I'll tell you if it actually works. That's all I'm gonna say.
Why do
Just give me a. Is that what I
Follow
mean?
me downstairs after you get this shit.
I
Why
just
do
need some-
Bigfoot hunters try and lure him with mating calls?
Do you
Do
have
they
any
have a
blaze
game
powder?
plan?
Dude,
Move
I'd
over
fuck Bigfoot.
Yeah, but like, imagine
No.
you're trying to lure him out with mating calls, and then he comes out of the woods, barreling towards you, full tilt with a raging hard on.
Yeah, I was about to say with a raging hard on.
This chest right here, dude.
I was gonna say stark naked, but Bigfoot's probably already stark naked.
I mean, there's
Give
a
me a minute, I'll
movie
be back.
coming out, Son of Bigfoot or whatever.
It's really dumb.
I can't wait
So,
for that new movie. You know,
Someone had to have fucked Bigfoot to have a son.
Brokeback Bigfoot.
Bigfoot broke back.
Bigfoot broke my back. What?
That sounds
There's
like
raging.
a chiropractic like foot fetish video.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Bigfoot broke my back. Get it?
Who is a fetish for chiropractors?
Jamal.
Fruit.
Obviously me, because I go to a chiropractor.
You
Fruit.
do have problems. But anyways.
I've got
There should never be.
scoliosis.
There should never be a question of who has a fetish for. Because there's always a fetish.
Dude, who is a fetish for D's nuts?
Here's the
I got
section of the
him.
stream where somebody kink shames somebody and Grimhood defends it.
Oh,
I can't believe people like being nice to people.
It's disgusting.
No,
Why
fucking the other
can't we
night,
be
somebody,
friends?
I can't remember who, I think it was Noob,
What?
was saying that something I hate about Grim is he defends every kink.
No, I didn't
You
say that
don't.
at all.
I
No,
can't
I think
remember
that's
who
great
does.
though.
I don't remember who said that.
I think that was
I
you
mean,
that said that.
No, it wasn't, because I also defend every kink.
all
Jerk
I
off to what
said
you want,
was.
dude.
All I
That's a
said was
lie.
everybody has their accent they like a lot, and that you shouldn't kink shame them for that.
Hey, I finally found the mine shaft Terry was telling me about.
Where is it?
In the underground.
Tell me the location coordinates wise, please.
Watch my stream, you can look at it there.
Jamal.
No.
Give me Twitch
Stream
tell
money.
me.
typing.
Jamal, you earn enough money off Twitch. I don't think you should get any more.
I've earned $100.
That's too much already. Better fix that.
Okay, cool. Now that I've gotten this made, see what happens.
Farkas has stopped giving me bits, now he just gives me eggs and sadness.
Oh, you swine. You have to show your tits if you want some real money.
Hey, Eli's
Wolf
here.
job.
It's heart.
I don't know why, but I find it funny that Tommy Wiseau wouldn't answer a question about what kind of dinosaur he'd be.
What?
Tommy, if you were a dinosaur, what kind would you be? Move
Yeah.
on. Next question. I understand. Some questions are too personal. I apologize.
Hold on, can I actually uncraft this?
Hey, no. Talk to me in Steam really quick.
Don't tell him.
I'm not telling you, Fred. I'm sorry. I mean, I'll tell you later. but
I'm seriously
for
gonna
now-
be pissed off if you guys stop playing this mod before the full month that we paid for is done.
See,
I am so
Jamal,
broke, and I
Jamal,
gave Paul $30.
Jamal, I'm gonna be honest with you. First of all, I have an issue with modding Minecraft right to finish everything, or else I can't come.
No, you have a
Um,
problem with
Jamal!
anything that you do.
Hey, you found an abandoned mine shaft, Jamal.
Yeah, it's just like my stream, abandoned with some things hanging around here and there.
Yeah.
Jamal, Fred, I'm just gonna tell you. 1 second.
Don't fucking tell him.
Finish, Lenny.
I can make that fucking mod pack get done for you quicker by banning you. Paul has given me the power.
You've gone mad with it. Paul, remove his power.
Don't fucking do that.
Paul, do it.
Paul's
Paul,
not
remove
listening
the
to the stream.
powers.
Ha ha ha.
I know, probably because he doesn't like seeing someone who yells at his friends a lot.
I can't believe that.
Here, I'll message him in Discord.
Ban me harder, daddy.
I can't believe that actually worked. This is stupid. What the fuck?
Jamal, why did that zombie spawn
think
like
it's-
the moment you turned?
I
I
don't
think
know.
it's so Jamal, and I'm just gonna tell you something. I gave you. I'm not gonna tell you exactly how to do it because like Jamal get mad at me. I just gave you a hint. It's a puzzle. Fucking tell you this shit.
It's like the secret world.
All I know is I like the fact that you can either craft this this item with some obsidian and an ender eye, or you can make it with a end crystal.
The shitty thing is, though, I fucking gave you that on crafting table.
You did, thank you, and you can use it at any point. You made a trade. I mean, fruit. I gave you all the. Fuck it, I'll tell you.
You fool.
Wow, that took
You
a lot of
messed with the
convincing.
natural order.
There you go, fruit. Fucking go.
Dankeschön.
That boy, it's more of a.
Great, I already feel like I'm left behind on this mod pack already.
I mean, I'm not using it for anything super evil
But fruit is.
because, I mean, yeah, but I mean, okay.
Why do you? You know, I'm not even gonna fucking invite him to the next time we do this.
Oh, I mean, okay, Jamal. Here's the thing. Here's the thing about Minecraft.
Yeah, Jamal, you're a real asshole, you know that?
Yeah, I am.
You can make beer and wine?
Yeah,
Oh,
you
Benny,
can
we're gonna
live
have
my
so much
life
fun.
of being an alcoholic in Minecraft.
Betty.
What?
Let's
Every
make
time
a
I try to play a
restaurant.
game with you, Jamal, all you ever do is yell at me.
Yes.
I yell at you because you fucking.
Let's do it. Me and Betty are gonna make a restaurant.
Like
you
an
yell at me
authentic-
because I played the game.
Yeah, it's gonna have.
Upper class.
Oh my god, that'd be amazing.
And just so it's authentically upper class, it's gonna be in Rahen.
Ooh, there's like all new kinds of bookshelves
So they've got,
and
Do we have
you those bricks?
styles.
Do we have the
Yeah,
permits
it's
to
more
build in
like
Rahen?
I need a brace. Or I'll just borrow yours for now because I have a shit ton of
Brace,
iron if
yeah,
you're
I mean-
okay with smelting it.
Just throw them in there. I have a really big furnace. I made an overly big furnace to compensate for my small dick.
Well, that's good because my heart's racing because I'm just waiting to be
Factory?
banned any second now, so I'm trying to get as much work as I can.
I'm not gonna ban you.
No,
Just
you're probably gonna
promise
ban
me
me,
this.
honestly.
I paid a decent amount of money with money I don't have. Don't get
Jamal.
bored of this mod pack in 7 seconds like you did last
Jamal, I want you to point something out, and I'm gonna say these words, and you're immediately gonna go, "Oh, you know what? You're right, dude." I'm
There's
currently playing this over
mahogany.
Minecraft right over Warcraft right now.
Yeah,
mean-
so
time. Okay,
We're all playing this over WoW right now.
fair point.
So- yeah, so maybe stop bitching for a second because you're ruining my experience.
Oh,
On a
sorry.
side note, Jamal, where are you?
I'm mining, playing the game,
Okay.
legitimately.
Yeah,
You know,
we're playing the game.
The thing
legitimately.
about modpack is that there's different ways of going about it. Like for instance, for some reason, for some reason, Twilight Forest.
Listen, I'm just
is
saying, the
busted.
fucking last time we did a mod pack, you guys cheesed it so severely, you guys got bored in 10 days.
10 days isn't really.
I paid for
So-
a whole month.
For a while, this was Ashitai's Wikipedia page.
That's good.
What's portal trying to
Oh.
use? Notice the
I heard he's a total
travel
douchebag.
portals with
He is.
Oh yeah, he's huge, really full of himself.
He's a lawyer. Of course, he's a douchebag.
Oh, that explains some things.
He needs to learn his fucking place.
So
What
how
do I
about
keep
make steel?
hearing? Keep hearing what sounds like things like melting or something. I don't know.
Oh, that's just the Oniontown experience.
Onion.
Yeah.
Well, I just pretty much had to make a starter machine to make some ingot, like steel.
Shit, dude, I don't know. Every single time I do a
Um,
mod pack, I try to do machines and give up halfway through.
I'm gonna read these books that we got. I feel like it will say in there.
Oh my god, yeah, I do. Fuck. Okay, so I just figure out how. I think I figured out how to make steel.
Yeah, iron and copper.
No, I
Big
think
black
iron
monsters coming after you.
That's how you make steel in RuneScape.
What? Oh, that was. No, that was tin and copper.
Also, you guys want to make you guys feel a lot better about everything.
These nuts.
Alright, or more like Benny and new type. I want you guys to look. I just want to go in there and type in glass.
Grim, you're thinking.
Oh, you're gonna give them an overload, dude. Don't make them do that.
Bronze is tin and copper.
You're setting them up
steel
for
was extra
genius.
coal. Oh, that's what it was.
Look at all that this chiseled glass.
I need to get my fish back though. That really pisses me
What?
off, man.
The heck is this astral tome?
Oh,
it's
that
a-
is,
it's a new mod.
That's for magic stuff.
Fuck,
if you're
I keep
into
forgetting
that
I don't
stuff.
have arrows.
I spread this mod's called Knee Creeps. God damn it.
What? Oh, the Rick one.
Yeah, I'm
The
gonna see
Pickle
what this does.
I'm Pickle Rick.
You know, I'm starting to convince myself that the reason why I have chronic heartburn is because anytime you guys do something that makes me angry, my heart just catches on fire.
You have chronic heartburn.
Yes.
You eat too much
Oh.
pizza.
Yeah.
You might be a little too young for that.
Yeah, that's actually
Yeah, you
not really.
kind of are.
Yeah, I'm too young for a lot of things.
Knee
Well,
Creeps is a very early game. Creatures that help you. Blah blah. Can I
Knee
mod?
Creeps.
What is it? Mod?
Alright.
I missed the meat creeps.
Rick, the
Oh, that's the
item in
reason why I
your
have
thing.
heartburn. I've been vaping pure rubbing alcohol this whole time.
I wouldn't put it past you to be
There's a
fair.
book called Materials and You shows how to build a forgery.
That's for Tinker's Construct.
That's for making fake money. Thank you,
Which
Rick.
book? Which book?
Materials and You shows how to make like a smelter thing and stuff.
I got one.
I'm assuming that's how you make steel.
Does it say anything about steel?
My big black monster.
Um.
God.
My buddy Dix.
Also, what's Terry building? Is that like his little solarium over there?
Oh, you mean the desk lamp that's above Noob's house?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a desk lamp overlooking Noob's house.
Portal gun that creates a pair of portals between two locations and can set up to 6 to 8 destinations with a gun anywhere from the world and even other dimensions. Okay, that's pretty. I see a better portal gun.
Big black monster is fucking my wife.
Oh, speaking of fucking wives, the 2017 season finale is really starting to come together, guys.
What?
All these things that are happening,
Oh.
like on today in particular, like Net Neutrality's gone, rest in peace.
God damn, Bert, holy shit.
Fucking Disney owns the rights to Fox. That's a fucking midget zombie riding a chicken.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Oh, thanks, noob.
What the fuck
What's
was
this purple shit?
that?
That was beautiful! Oh, you need to lure it into our town!
Is that like a
cage.
fucking... I already
This is
killed it.
nothing.
It's dead.
Oh.
Because he just galloped towards me and started pecking at my throat.
Jesus.
Words, what was it? Oh
Okay.
yeah.
There's some
Boogie's
stuff.
divorcing his wife.
What?
is?
Wait, we get a wife?
Yeah, Boogie had a wife.
Who?
The big fat guy on YouTube.
Or why is
I don't-
divorcing?
I don't know.
Unfaithfulness.
Oh.
And then the other thing that happened today is Dr. Disrespect today went live explaining how he's taking an absence from Twitch because he cheated on his wife.
Why?
2017's come to a close in a fucking
Jesus Christ, it doesn't like a fucking finale to a show.
It's a
Sounds like
soap
cups
opera.
are taking over the world finally.
Oh no.
I always knew cups would kill us all.
Oh no.
Where'd you get these
spiders.
spawner shards?
Oh, if you break a mob spawner now, it gives you
You know, I've
spawner
never
shards.
actually played Chrono Trigger. I'm listening to an online radio right now that just plays random game music.
Why do we need
Wait.
to go back to that one?
The fact that you've never played Chrono Trigger still bothers me.
I've
I've
watched
never
like
played Chrono
playthroughs of
Trigger.
it, but I've never played it.
That game is fucking amazing. I actually
I've
It is.
100%ed it as a kid. I did the DS version too, which had the super final boss that essentially explained how Chrono Cross happened, that terrible game that no one
I'm
likes.
heading out.
Bye,
See you later. Bye, Reverick.
Have a good night, man.
No, just
Also,
it's
if
gonna
you-
nuke Rock.
Perkins?
What was it, Bert?
I said if you Do you need any like iron or something? Like, go to my fucking thing and melt
I
as
have
much
like
as you need.
4 stacks of blocks.
Yeah, Chris, we're doing Minecraft, modded Minecraft. Eee.
Well,
There's
I'm
Rick
done
and
for
Morty
my
mods
Minecraft.
in here.
Oh.
Actually, no. Can I make some? Would it be okay with you if I made some demon stuff?
In my house? No.
Oh god, I thought I just fell in lava for a second. I forgot about.
If you're gonna do
fucking
that demon
water.
stuff, you gotta take it outside.
Basically.
Don't bring
Grimwood,
in
would you
mud
like
into
to
the
join my
house.
demon activities?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Oh, cool, then. Come to my nether fortress,
Not
Go-
now.
Oh, Grim, but there's so much love to give.
So what's that red liquid?
Oh,
Blood.
that's dick blood.
Dick blood.
Blood from people's dick specifically.
Destabilized redstone ore. Is that supposed to be redstone sand?
Hey Chris, I
Nice
actually
ones.
do have the world from school, blackjack and hookers.
Oh, is that like your related to the shit hits the fan thing?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Another failed aspiration of mine.
I thought you completed that though. You sent me all the animatics.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You said you were waiting on Bojack's voice act.
It's all coming together again.
Just think, Jamal, it's all coming together. Bojack's husband
I'm
exploded.
still waiting on the contract to go through with Fox for them to buy me out too.
Star Fox?
Fox.
I mean,
Can't buy you out.
Disney.
You messed up. You fucked
mean
up.
on
Fucked
Santo?
up me.
Jamal fucks up again. New year, same shit. 2018.
So,
Chris,
do you want to
I'll send it over to you later.
Or do
I
those
kept
guys,
all
do you
that
want
shit
to?
backed up.
How would you like to make some fucking demon steel bars?
I mean,
Does
it
it?
like take a lot of effort.
How much should we jerk off a demon to get the?
I
Well,
mean,
we need demon.
just
don't know
enough,
if I
just
wanna
enough to
jerk
make
off
them
Damon.
please, but
No,
Just
we
enough
need
to
demon
please
semen
them.
from the semen demon.
demon semen demons, yeah.
demon.
But I'm gonna go now.
Good luck with your
Okay.
court hearing tomorrow. Grim.
Courtier.
Kill them all,
Missing,
Grim.
guilty, you're fired from life. Oh.
Remember, Grim. Kill them all. Let God sort them out.
Bye.
Probably should join him here, but once I reach the bottom of this waterfall,
I have so much heartburn.
I wish my polar bear didn't have to die.
what is that?
Polar bear.
Oh, it's a witch!
Benny, you ask a lot of questions. I'm getting worried. Me and Grim, we've been getting worried recently. We
I'm
just,
just fucking mining redstone. I don't need that.
I need redstone. I need a lot of redstone actually.
I have like
I have
30
a lot of
fucking
redstone
stacks.
from vanilla.
Remember when I collected it because I had that texture pack that made it look glowy and nice, and I just stared at that chest for like
I mean, I
hours?
took redstone because I actually used it.
You don't want to donate some redstone to the cause?
There's fucking sponges in our house.
Oh fuck. Goddamn fucking midgets, they just run at you and start gnawing at your ankles.
What are you talking about, you creep? Get off my goddamn Tumblr.
Don't kink shame.
Stick of it.
Midgets with ankle fetishes.
It's not.
Sounds like a band.
It sounds like a punk rock band, you're right.
Alright. Time to start making some demon bars. Jamal can't stop me even if he wants to. Because I worship Satan.
And bam.
Brute, I don't want you to stop playing Minecraft, I swear to God.
Oh, you
I'll
didn't hear
ban
my
you
joke
before
from
you die.
earlier, did you? So
Which
if
one?
you want to blow through this mod pack, I can make it with Endeavor for you.
And I recall you saying something like that, and you banned Noob forever for some reason.
Yeah, ban noob. Yo, what up, Jack?
I say I can have some redstone. Is it right? Where is it?
Oh my god, I hate heartburn.
Maybe don't have heartburn then, dummy.
Thanks, I'll be sure not to do that next time.
Well, I warned you. Now, girls.
Fuck off,
Let's see if
Professor! Ooh, there's lots of shit in here.
Alright, so that's 23 demon bars.
What?
Let's make a full stack. Oh god. Oh god, more demons. More demons. I need them. Alright, if you need any demon bars, I have about 2 stacks.
Tapping furiously. Yeah,
So, Noob, can I make
keyboard. It's not as bad as mine.
Can I make a request for you, Noob?
Sure.
Oh my god, you can make Klein bottles in this fucking game? Are you kidding me?
It's pretty cool.
Anyways, could you make me some sort of... Oh, I don't know, like some sort of demonic rapier? Or like a demonic battle axe?
We have to find some redstone in your house and I can do that.
What?
I get some redstone.
Is redstone needed for this, or...?
No, but... Oh, there's your redstone. So you can take some, right?
Yeah, go for it. I have
How
like
much-
thousands.
I think this is Super Metroid, but I'm not actually too sure.
I think so, yeah.
See, the thing is this
Yeah.
online radio I'm listening to, it doesn't tell you what the track is or what game it's from. It's just a game radio. The one I used to use told me what the song was.
Did Minecraft crash again?
Nah, it's good.
No, I think for me it did. I'm not
Then
talking about the fucking server.
most likely. I mean, hey, I'm just used to the server crashing at this point.
This is so fucking annoying.
Whenever we imported Rahin in, we crashed the server at least 20 times, I'm gonna estimate.
I remember, for some reason you felt inclined to warn me when I was playing WoW.
Well, I didn't know if you and Terry were gonna be joining the server or not.
Marsh is a fucking idiot.
Yeah, fuck me for, you know, telling people, hey, don't bother launching the game because you're gonna waste 70 minutes of your time. How fucking dare I?
How dare you think that we're fucking human beings?
Hey guys,
Oh, Benny,
back.
welcome back.
my computer crashed, so I had to reboot.
Oh,
But I was,
Welcome to Minecraft.
brown
Yeah.
bricks.
but I was headed out anyways. I was gonna go see Connectogram and stuff, and I gotta get up early too. I'm gonna go see Star Wars like first thing in the morning with my
Nice.
cousin.
That's nice.
Well, enjoy yourself
You
with
were
Star
so-
Wars.
Hey, man, see you
Yeah,
later,
cool.
man.
Go.
Have a good one, you guys.
See you.
Try not to kill each other.
Oh,
No
not
promises.
chances.
What an asshole. Okay.
Now that Benny's gone, dude, what's to go first? Flicks open Switchblade. Oh yeah, Fruit, I want you to come clean about something. Is he even still here?
What do you want to talk to me about?
If it was actually him moving you around.
I don't think it was.
Well, either way, I removed that privilege from you guys. Because I actually didn't know you could do that while you're not in a call. That's just stupid. It's walls!
Wizzy Waz, what's in the vase?
This Minecraft is very important. Farkas says it was him. If it was, then kudos to you, Farkas, because I blame Fruit immediately. It's really a boy who cried wolf thing with him. Ugh, I can't wait to fix up my chatty settings. Oh great, here come the bits again. Here come the bits. Da da da. I still haven't changed the sound effects from the Spookfest sound effects. Oh yeah, don't forget guys, we have to hold a contest for best quote of 2017. We'll hold a community vote.
What if I don't want to, huh?
Well, too bad.
Oh.
Okay, KO. I actually am not sure what that is. I can't make bit badges, that's a partner only thing. I actually do have bit badges made out, but I can't apply them. So make me a partner first and then we'll talk. I need to reach an average viewer base of 75 people, considering right now I think I have like 7. tack a 5 onto the end. Oh yeah, it does work like that. Yeah, they changed the way partnership and stuff works on Twitch now. Because to become what I am, an affiliate, all you have to have is a viewer base of 3 people for like a whole month. And then you get access to the features of an affiliate, so like subscriber badge and then people donating bits and stuff like that. And then like with partner, you just gotta have 75 people like watch you for a whole month. Oh, creeper. So glad creepers don't blow up blocks in this mod pack. Alright, at this point I'm just going in circles. I always get so lost whenever I'm mining mod packs, man. I mean, YouTube and Twitch is at this point kind of like a double entendre type thing. Like, with me being an affiliate, I'm legally not allowed to stream on anything except for Twitch. Like, I actually have a contract that I signed for that. And then again, on Twitch, you have the risk of never being noticed because there's porn. There's actual porn being broadcast on Twitch instead. On YouTube, you probably make 0 money except through donations.
What are you talking about?
Twitch and how it's an awesome service and people should continue helping people.
Oh, I never used Twitch.
Yeah, it sucks. The Twitch launcher just crashes. We can never play Minecraft again.
I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, Twitch is good, but then like 90% of Twitch is garbage. It's sort of like what happened to YouTube, but much faster.
Yeah.
Well, can I see your tits live on stream?
I'll turn on my webcam for a second. There you go.
Are you naked?
I am naked.
I hate you.
H.
I'm waiting for the day when I make that joke and forget to put the period.
Well, I'm done with Minecraft. Hope that $30 is worth it. So, Noob, I got all these demon ingots. Can you make me some demon stuff from them?
I don't know what those do.
We'll type in demon for a second.
Oh.
Type in semen for a second and tell me what you
I don't know what
those.
I don't know. Dude, don't worry about it. Just come over here and make them.
Hey Eli, if you're gonna make a thumbnail, make it parody game theory. That'll get you views.
Kill me.
Yeah, dude. Steel, demonic metal gives you whispering. You occasionally whisper its will to you.
That's really fucking cool.
Don't know if that's is it.
Call me. So I got Yash Raj.
Second. On top of that, let's see, more durability. That's really the only thing that does it. It's pretty good attack damage. I think one of the better ones. Not as good as evil infused iron.
Well, yeah, but for now, demonic is still pretty good. So
Just toss in the furnace, and I'll make it some for it.
You can make me some stuff?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, Noob, that's the best. Thanks, man.
Never mind.
You have sex.
What?
Oh god, it feels good to stretch. Nope. Minimize that on Minecraft.
What the fuck did you just say to me?
What the fuck did you just fucking say about me, little bitch? I'll be I graduated my class.
Lava.
Efficiency essence. What the fuck is a terraformer?
I think it has something to do with terraforming.
Well, very clearly, Jamel, but
Nah, just kidding. It's a give up machine in Minecraft.
I could use some of those.
Are you winning, son? Okay, that does not go in there. That can do that.
The shitty thing is I can't run Chrome and Minecraft at the same time.
Yeah, I'm surprised I'm able to do it.
The fucking stream with this shit going on right now, like Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no wonder my computer fucking exploded earlier.
Maybe
The
that
more I
was the
think
cause.
about it. Stream's always muted Kappa. If you're gonna Kappa, at least do it right. Otherwise, it just looks like you're shit posting. Oh. I like how because Grimhood died in my furnace, there's blood in here now.
I'm doing mine a little bit.
I'm Pickle Rick, noob.
Are you?
I'm Pickle Rick. Ray!
Give me chicken tendies.
I'm Pickle Rick!
We don't have your chicken tendies or your McNugget sauce.
Oh, this thing's fast as fuck. We're giving a name this my hamburger. I'm fast as fuck, boy. As you know.
Call it Pickle Rick.
I wonder if there's
Well,
a
do you like my
Pickle Rick
memes?
in this mod.
There is.
There is.
I'm sort of surprised and not really disappointed at all.
Well, look up. There's a Rex portal gun in this, which means you
There's
can
also there's also an Evil Morty fanfiction book.
there's
I
also
just
you
searched for
can also
Rick and I didn't find
can
anything. I found a
you can
bunch
also
of
find
bricks.
Mr. Me. You can also make Mr. Meeseeks to cut trees down. Check that.
Wait, how do you make a meese?
I don't know.
Oh, he's known as Me Creeps. Oh,
Two
there goes my
words?
heartburn.
Wait, how do you know about me creeps? I can't even fucking find him.
I searched for it.
How do you spell me creeps?
Put in MEE and it should automatically be the last thing.
There we go. Dr. Shun.
Oh god, this heartburn. Look at this, it's a pool of liquid gold.
Oh, he just repeats your last action. That's kind of boring.
Alright, I gotta finally figure out what the fuck I'm doing wrong with this shit.
I'm Pickle Rick!
So I've never done Tinker's Construct before, so I'm trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing wrong here.
Alright, no, I was gonna ask you for your fucking your bricks or what have you. If that's cool with you, pal. I just break your dog's neck in front of you. Oh, dude, you have a
Hey,
reflexive
you
on
pulled
your
quote 1, now we gotta do them all in order now.
What?
Waz got the first ever quote.
Yeah, Waz isn't making... Waz really did go downhill after Season 3.
Hey, after Season 3 of Mastaonion.
Alright, dude, I'm putting this shit into your
He started
thing.
killing off all the characters people cared about, like Skyrim and The Sims.
Alright, Noob, give it a second. Don't look inside. And Noob, I'll teach you to make it really quick if you'd like. Noob, here, look for a second.
Hey, Noob, I think your Discord broke again if you're still here and not talking. Yep, there we go.
Yeah.
Follow me. I don't want to do this in a place where there's a lot of flammable materials.
Yeah.
And your house is entirely made of like the fucking... Dude, you gotta get rid of this fucking rug. It's fucking up my walking. But anyways.
I swear to God, cat. One second. Are you behind my monitor again? How the fuck do you keep it? No. Oh God, please don't kill me.
What?
Cat just tried to kill me. She'll fry neck.
Yeah,
Tell me.
There's a thing, but I don't know what happened to the thing.
Noob over here, mind grind. Alright, are you ready?
Sure.
Shit.
Nice work, dumbass. You broke it.
I should
Alright,
probably
let me
pay more attention to things.
Alright, let me get the materials necessary. Noob, stand back. I need to get the materials for this. Just wait here.
Alright, I think I need
Does
to
anyone-
copy Noob's design.
So what the fuck does Draconic Evolution do exactly?
What's up?
Hey.
Look at this hammer. It's hammer. That's fuck boy. What's this fuck boy?
I can't figure out how to get the furnace to work.
I'll show you one second.
How do you even get down there? I have no idea how your new house works.
Really, there's literally one direction to go. It's not that
I mean, my brain is just programmed to go straight to where his secret chest was.
In there. I mean, mine's a lot bigger than you probably want yours, but I'm a fucking maniac.
Semen Demon?
Yeah, Semen Demon. You want a seared tank, a small tray controller. That's all you really need.
And I have
It has
all
to be
these
2 blocks
things
tall.
set up like this. I just don't know why
2
mine
blocks
doesn't
tall?
work.
How tall is it?
Here, hold on. Wait, I think I know what I'm doing wrong. How do you make the plates for these things?
Plates.
Like this.
Look, I haven't. It's just like a little like a. One second, one of my bricks.
Oh.
Yeah, just my bricks.
Yeah, how do you make the casts?
Casts?
Yeah.
So you have to make a part builder. Let's see here. You can it. This part builder basically you put things in, you make a pattern, and then you make and then you put the stone in there, and you basically I'll show you. So you take, they say make them on
Okay,
like
yeah,
a
I see
stone
that,
top
but
rod.
how do you also make patterns?
Patterns if you go to a stencil table.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
You see,
missing.
so, and then here come here.
See,
so
I
you
was
take,
thinking okay, I'm retarded.
So you put gold in there, and
No,
you
I'll
put
show
down.
you what
so
I've been
put,
doing. I understand it now, but what I kept thinking I was supposed to do was like if I wanted to make like a fucking, you know, like say an axe. I thought I had to put my axe down in that thing and then just let it
no.
pour over.
Here, okay, this one's in that house.
I
Cat,
don't
no,
want it.
You're not,
Fuck
not
you.
allowed to. Oh my god, Cat, you're gonna ruin my life. Please. Please, 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 please. What are you doing? What are you grabbing onto?
No, please, calm
You're not,
down.
you're not allowed on my desk. I warned you. I've warned you what happened. You'll get a bath and I'll let you get warm again.
No, don't snap the
freeze
cat's neck.
I don't know why I made that sound. It's supposed to be the next stepping sound.
You already done showing Jamel how to do this shit yet?
Yes, yeah.
Well, then we go back to the spot that
Also,
we were
did
at.
you guys see the sign I put on top of the pool?
No, what did it say?
I put down a sign that says pool is closed due to extreme AIDS, but it's set up like a don't dead open inside.
Where are you?
It could
I'm
say
back where,
pool
where
is
we should be
extreme
right now.
closed due to AIDS.
Alright, dude, coming over. Let me explain how to do this. It's actually really simple. See what's in my hand here?
Gold, yeah.
You just don't know how to shut up, do you?
That's
Hey, don't talk to him that way.
really weird.
Also, Fruit, congratulations, you almost took me down
Jesus.
to half health.
It's
Thank
really
you.
easy when you have a fucking magical scepter I got for killing a lich. I mean, when you kill a lich, that tends to happen.
Pretty cool. For real, I don't know what I'm gonna do with all this, but I mean, I can make you things, I guess.
Good, make me some cool shit from
What
it.
are you gonna make you?
Alright.
I want
A rapier, okay.
a hammer.
Out of fucking demonic steel? A demon steel? Demon ingot?
Fuck yeah.
Oh shit, I
mean,
forgot I
well-
got some things, but I don't have enough, I think.
But I mean, it's kind of a bad.
Hey, can I make a request for you guys if you keep your eyes out for something or have any of these
What's
on
up?
hand?
What?
You know those like red crystals you'll find in caves and shit?
Yeah,
Yeah.
why? What are you,
Give me them.
why? What are you doing with them?
I'm making a coffee machine.
What? What's it there for?
Do you know what the
Was
coffee
I-
machine does?
No,
Machine.
please explain.
Coffee addict.
So you can make coffee in the game, and you know how they have a little hunger mod on this game, where
Mm-hmm.
if you eat food and get overstuffed, you don't have to eat for a while?
Uh-huh.
If you drink a cup of coffee, you get 40 of them.
40.
40.
Alright, Jamal, do you need a resonating crystal, yeah?
Yeah, or is that what they're called?
You said a red crystal, right?
Yeah, they're little shards.
Oh, the shards? I have the full crystal.
I don't need the whole crystal thing. That's a different mod.
I don't actually know what shards you're talking about then.
You probably haven't found any then yet. Oop. Farkas just said chicken.
Yeah, dude, what's wrong with making? Make me like some demons. Steel stuff.
I'll make you a weapon out of it, but the mining level is iron.
Okay, then maybe not that.
Yeah. I'll make you a weapon though.
So. Yeah, make me some sick ass weapons. Like, what weapons are available nowadays?
The same thing. Nothing changed.
I just looked at the Minestick chat in the modded one. Paul just created a pin post for the underlining the import button on the create profile thing.
Damn it.
With no context whatsoever, so I'm assuming a lot of people are having issues with it.
How about this, Noob? Can you make me a demonic? Is there a battle axe anymore?
I don't see it anymore.
Can you make me a demonic cleaver then?
Cleaver.
Cleaver sounds cool as shit. I know.
Make the cleaver? I mean, yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
I realize I'm asking a lot, but fuck you. You'll do what I say, or I'll break your neck.
That's
Okay.
how Smogco is.
Basically.
So we actually gotta build a Smogco.
Smogco is whatever you guys. Smogco is whatever you make it of.
Smogco is already fucking built. Noob's house is
Where's
sort
the
of like
fucking smokestacks?
Those
I
come
have
in
to go
time.
to Twilight Forest and find them again, and that's not easy because I've. Jamel, if you want to go on an adventure with me to help find the smokestacks, I'd be entirely willing to do that.
Let me finish some of my mods first. I really haven't done much on the server other than pimp out my kitchen and find some things.
So anyway, is Battle Axe still a thing, or what the fuck?
Not that I stall.
Alright,
Sorry.
Soul?
I'm making you a cleaver though, so I've already started to.
Oh, is that really?
Right.
Fuck, I'm dumb.
Let's just see what kind of axes there are. Maybe that'll help. And thank you for this, Noob. I do appreciate it. Are you making you're making a slime handle, right? Because those are the best handles.
Are they still the best handles?
Weren't they?
What's so good about them?
I don't know. What was the best handle before? Do you fucking remember?
I remember what's gooey mean? Like slimy. Let's make that.
I think it means it repairs itself.
Would you just ask what GUI is?
Or slimy.
In terms of Tinker's construct.
It's the GUI, the general UI, the general user interface. I had to go over and look at Discord to make sure you guys didn't leave. I had previously a stencil, or a blank pattern, but I don't remember what I did with it.
I don't remember what the best handles were anymore. Shit.
They changed everything, so that's why I'm kind of looking into it.
I feel like they didn't change that. Also, Jamal, weird question for you. Would you like a mining dimension all to yourself?
A mining dimension?
Yes, a place where you can just mine infinitely.
Slimy just means that it spawns. It has a 0.3% chance when using the item to spawn a slime.
Farkas says the best handle is paper or slime. And then Butt chimed in saying or butt.
Well,
yeah, well, Farkas, is this the new one or the old one? Because the new one, they changed a lot of things about it.
No, I think, the durability is still the best
paper,
for slime. No, slime is much better, trust me.
I don't have any slimes, so...
You have slime balls?
Where?
In this chest right here, you have 2.
Wait, where? Or slime ball? I don't think it's enough to make a cleaver, is it?
Well, no, you're just making a handle.
I'm making a handle, but I don't think I have enough. I don't think it's enough. Yeah, I need 3. I need 1 more.
Well, let me go check my shit. I know where I guarantee to have
green
some.
or blue?
I'll go for green.
In that case, I think I have some.
I should have some. Give me a second to look. Well, stop screaming.
Oh god, I did that and I felt my heartburn just die.
What did you eat today exactly?
I had 2 grilled cheese sandwiches.
What are you?
One too many.
It's a
It's 2 too
delicious
many.
grilled cheese sandwich.
Cheese are disgusting. You
Also,
should feel
I
bad.
I eat an entire pizza and I don't have heartburn. Fuck.
See, I can eat anything and I won't get heartburn. The only thing I can say heartburn is fucking drinking wine.
Yeah, wine does give me heartburn.
Oh, I know what gave me the heartburn. It was all that pussy I ate earlier.
Don't lie.
Everybody knows Minecraft streamers get all the pussy.
Very sad. What a sad, strange little man.
So for you don't want blue slime, you want red green.
If possible, yeah.
You mean
I would
dick.
have green. I would have blue if you don't find any green.
I have green, unless you have blue.
I have both. Which one works for you?
Then do blue, because, I don't know, it looks nicer.
What works for you? Red and blue or red and green?
Red and blue, please. Slate.
You want purple, but you want the Moncilium or Mollium, what it's called, binding, or you want Adderite?
Wait, what's Mycelium binding?
It gives you. I think it gives more damage done if you're at full health.
And what's the other one?
I think just more. Let's see, let me look notes. Maybe they changed it. Let's see. Let's see. Mollium or Marlin is during combat you deal more damage, but also consume more and more durability. And then Adderite is actually never mind. This eats stone.
It eats stone?
Yeah. But it's a weapon, so you won't need to use that. So I mean, let's see, I'm making a. I'll do cold blooded because it deal increased damage to targets at full health.
That's good. Yeah, I like that. That's just like
Pretty
one-shotting
decent.
shit, so that's nice.
Oh.
Paper binding is also good, remember.
This. It's supposed to lock and
Don't know who that is.
also like this music kicked in Rising Jump.
Aha! Jamel's getting somewhere.
How do you make I'm going crazy in a second.
Hey, how many experience levels do you have right now?
13.
Oh, can you...
Yes, sire.
I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth a bunch. I really wish I had like fast boots or something with Boomcraft. Those were so cool. Man, I really wish there was Boomcraft, but I'm getting kind of bored.
Balls off himself.
How did you know? What the fuck?
Why can't I make his slime? Why can't I make a slime hand?
Well, let me look up how to make a slime handle really quick. A moment, Marquita.
Yeah, you look at that.
What?
It won't show you. I'm putting in the part builder, but it won't do anything.
Maybe you're making the handle wrong.
There's probably a much faster way of doing this.
Yes, do I melt it in the furnace now? No?
You have to make slime crystals.
What?
Oh, I see. You have to, yeah, you have to get... You want to make a slime tool rod, right?
Yes.
Alright, so you're making a slime crystal.
I make a slime crystal.
Or a slime shard. Give me a second. I'm looking this up to help you figure this out. Probably pretty simple, but
This is the content people line up for.
you mean Jamal not talking at all and being noob actually does.
Yeah.
Slime crystal noob.
What slime shard do you want?
You have to make slimy mud. Now to make slimy mud, you just have to mix 4 slime balls, some sand, and some dirt.
I can do that.
You know, we're kind of lazy.
Air, 404 sand not found. I think I might put that out actually.
Comment over. It's Pickle Rick.
Dickhole Rick.
Also, I'm just gonna print any weird fucking random samplings I find out part of Oniontown. I hope that's okay.
God help us.
And you did that all the existence.
Yeah,
of
fucking sand in
Minestick,
mine. Let's put like sand.
Well, now that the mod stage is okay, that means there's room for improvement.
Is it muddy slime you said?
Muddy slime, my dude.
Slimy grass you mean?
Just said muddy slime. Were you fucking listening?
Loose slimy mud. Slows but helps you jump even higher. Okay. I see.
Blue slime mud, yes, that's the shit we need. Do you need sand? I'm coming over.
I'm fine actually.
I'm bringing sand anyways.
How much do we need? Just one?
1 to make a slime crystal, and then you gotta put in your furnace and melt. Or not the furnace, put in the fucking oven. And then my game crashed again.
So it'll make one.
Have I ever mentioned that my favorite part of Minecraft is the loading screens they have?
Dirt? Yeah, I love it.
No, loading screens I mean is just the game crashing if you haven't just started up again. Every 30 minutes or so. Just very, man, good shit.
I need one more blue slime block, I think. A slime ball.
I won't be able to help you for probably about 10 more minutes until this shit fucking loads again.
I'll ransack the place so I can find a blue slime ball.
If you need to make
I'll choose Terry as me. Fuck it. I mean, give him lost up and I can take some of him. That one fucking thing of slime. I ask. I think he has any.
Also, apparently you can make a battle axe still.
Again?
Hmm.
I didn't see it there. Oh, well, you're gonna leave her.
Let me explain how it works. It just requires you to bind 2 broad axe heads together.
You're kidding, there's literally a thing right above my house. Kinda shitty.
I don't know what to tell you.
God damn, you did a lot of work today.
But do I need to use molten clay to make the casts?
No, you can use gold.
Wait.
I can use some gold to use some.
Hey, Jamel figured it out.
This is like victory music for you.
It took several days. Is there like a special chest that I can keep the casts in, or do I just put them in there?
Yep, cast. Oh, make cast. I mean, yeah, you'd put in normal chests. Patterns would be just a chest you can make for them, but I mean,
Okay, so
I need one more fucking blue slime ball. Jamal, do you have any blue slime balls?
probably not now.
Give me a second.
Well, I'm gonna go fucking to island here in a minute.
There's an island over there, yeah.
Yeah, I'm missing the one that's near your house, that paper.
Don't you have a fucking portal maker?
No?
Deedle doodle?
A portal gun?
These nuts?
No, I haven't made a portal gun. I'm kind of keeping off of that for a little bit.
These nuts? These nuts?
What?
God.
Congratulations, Farkas. You managed to leave the server before you even joined it.
This is fucking music.
I don't know.
Speaking of what the fuck is this music?
Ladies and gentlemen, live from the Zeppelin races, it's twitch.tv/Mastaonion. Ladies and gentlemen, watch as he ruins his life by playing Minecraft until 7:30 in the morning, every night for the next 6 days.
That's sad. You're still with the filter on?
Okay, Fred, I got enough slam balls to make a fucking small house.
I mean, it's Mario music.
Is it Mario music? Very weird Mario music.
Well, actually, no, it's not Mario. What the fuck am I talking about?
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking about, you dumbass? You fucking idiot. Slimy leaves.
God, this fucking whatever the song is, it's on the tip of my tongue right now. I don't remember what it is. The heartburn's got my throat.
Only green slimy dirt was something we needed.
Pac-Man? Is it Pac-Man?
What?
It's something fucking arcade. I know that. Really wish there was a way I could just Google myself going. "Da, da, 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 da."
Oh shit.
Here comes Pac-Man. This is my shit post.
What's up?
What's up?
I'm high
high
on
on
crack. No, Pac-Man, drugs are bad.
Yeah, man, help you, man.
Whoa. Holy shit.
I don't like this.
Okay, Fred, I made you a slimy tool rod now, okay? What else do I need to make? What else do I need to make for a cleaver? I also need a... Sorry, I need 2 tool rods. You want to make another slimy one, or you want to make it out something else? You'll make it green and blue or no?
Make me a green and blue.
This doesn't look like a fucking clown weapon either, right? Really this is the most pathetic, like, weird looking, meme we've seen.
Fuck, this is gonna bother me all night now. What the fuck is this song?
I made some green slime.
Did Ding Dong have music?
Yes, but it was like 5 seconds.
Alright, I'm back in until my game crashes again in 10 seconds.
Well, if you have any slime, the green slime, let me know.
Okay, I have green slime, here you go.
Jesus Christ, okay. You have any sand?
Okay, I have sand. Here you
Please
go.
put that away.
What, this?
Yeah. Cool. Kill us all.
Anyways, I'm going to work on making some cobblestone portal thing. You just do whatever, noob.
I'm making you a weapon, okay.
Yeah. I wasn't judging you, I was just saying you just do whatever, man.
Fucking kill you.
Yo, 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 what it is, motherfuckers.
Oh shit.
Mateys.
I just went to the stag party.
No, Pac-Man stag parties are bad.
Yo, yo,
Your
yo,
clock
what it
doesn't
is, motherfuckers.
You wanna play Drink the Beer?
No, Pac-Man.
Man,
Beer
drinking the beer is bad. What do you even win?
I hate my life.
What it is, motherfuckers?
Pac. It's Pac-Man, guys.
Bitches, let's go to the stag party.
That's no Pac-Man. I'm high on drugs.
Stand
What-
parties.
What do you want the plate to be for?
What?
Purple?
I hate my life.
The plate.
The plate?
Yeah.
Wait. Can choose?
Yeah, the plate. Remember?
Yes. Turn it purple.
Purple or blue?
Purple, please.
But I want purple. For what?
Nice
Oh no! Why did you
colors,
put it
man.
right there?
Fuck. I need another
Can I
diamond.
move it?
Fuck my dick.
Okay, cool. This is the last time we just walk on it. This makes it. You know, if you showed me this picture like years ago, I would have probably shit myself.
What?
Because the amount of fucking cobblestone that it used to take was like exponentially more.
Oh no! It just took triple compressed cobblestone.
Does that not
Yeah,
work?
which is, you know. Well, for you ready? I'm making it for you.
Oh, I
Yes,
got a
thank you,
chisel.
Alexander.
I got a fucking chisel. Oh, I think I just figured out why I have a heartburn.
Why?
It may be 3 Little Debbie cosmic brownies today.
Boxes?
No, just individuals. You
think I can afford eat an
boxes
entire
right now?
Price fruit.
Holy shit! That looks amazing.
I think that's actually pretty cool.
Pass that shit. So how do I?
Jesus,
upgrade
the thing's
this
fucking
thing?
huge. Oh, you need my god, please.
How much damage did that do?
Alright.
Well, it says, hey you, let's go kill everything, and time for death and destruction.
Why is this not working?
What does the right click do? Dude, what does right click do for these things?
I don't know.
Alright, so how do I upgrade these fucking things nowadays?
I remember, remember same thing as last time. You have to throw it into the tool forge and use what's it called? You have to use quartz. I don't know quartz. I'll move with some now.
Not necessarily quartz, isn't there like
I
other
got
shit?
a question.
Here, what's
What's
up?
Is this a reoccurring thing with mod packs where a recipe just doesn't fucking work?
Yeah.
No. The thing with mod packs, a lot of times you have to be exactly specific.
Oh. God damn it.
What'd you fuck up?
I've been trying to craft an iron chest when I need a silver chest. Do I even have silver yet? Is that a thing I have?
Probably not.
Wait, you trying to make a diamond chest because you don't need...
I mean, I made some earlier.
What the fuck is this smiley cloud?
Don't you love
these
them?
are actually really easy to make, shit.
Yeah.
What do they do?
Just sit there and stare
They're
menacingly.
pets. Okay, I know what this song is. This is fucking obviously Tetris.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you take me for? Some kind of gaming casual? I don't know the classics. What the fuck was that last
Because you're a
song?
tool.
I have no idea what the last song was.
You'll never know either.
No, I know what it is. I just don't.
Ow, 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 Lico man. Thank you.
Yo, 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 what it is, motherfuckers.
Oh fuck, I brought the food. Hey, Fur, can you bring some food in another?
Hmm?
You're a long cat. Maybe I'll touch on.
Be careful, it might crash your game.
Oh.
Please, cat, why? I she's boy, you bitch.
You know, I can't unhear the lyrics to the Dwayne and Brando Tetris song whenever I hear this.
Wait, yeah.
There's an L M in this thing. That ain't even fair. Put it over there.
Can you make me a demon steel shuriken?
That's how I made it. I am retarded.
Oh, no, question. Other thing. Can you make me 5 obsidian plates really quick? I can give you the obsidian for it.
I have obsidian, just that's a lot of fucking obsidian.
Oh, I can get. No, hold on. Let me just.
No, I mean that's a lot of work. Sorry, I just filled my furnace full of for obsidian. Give me a minute.
I've got a secret. No, it's in my pocket. See it?
The peen?
My dick.
No, don't put that. Put it down. Thanks, server. I get it.
Fuck.
Thank you for this fucking sick ass goddamn sword though. This thing's fucking amazing.
Sick ass.
I'm gonna murder the fuck out of Jamel with this.
Yeah, do it. Murder my pussy hole.
Okay. Bye, Jamel.
Looks like
Thanks.
I finished my 2-liter Mountain Dew.
Fucking freak.
Why do I have heartburn?
Yeah, you drink Mountain Dew. Do you actually drink Mountain Dew?
Yeah, who doesn't drink Mountain Dew?
Are you actually asking me this?
Yeah, yes, that was kind of a stupid question.
I don't like drinking any soda. That's why another reason I don't really like drinking alcohol because it's fucking carbonated. It's unpleasant.
No, it's
To you.
Yeah, I'm sure all the people love fizz on their tongue. It just feels so fucking good.
I'll hold
be
a
honest,
community poll right now. Everybody who likes drinking soda, say aye.
someone I don't know where my food is. I think I'm gonna starve to death. Can you bring me food and payment for these fucking plates?
And payment.
Hold on, I'm
Maybe.
giving Jamal his stupid portal. 1 second.
I don't want a portal.
Giving you a portal.
I don't want a portal.
I've walked all the way through this fucking mess of a house you have.
That's insulting.
Hey.
Can I move this?
No.
How does this work?
Just put it down and right-click it really quick. It'll give you the option to whether you want to go or not.
Well, I guess let's go to hell.
Oh, it's not hell.
Where do I want to put this?
Yeah. Somewhere cool.
Alright, this room shall now be my portal room. I'm right-clicking it, nothing happens.
Right, click link. Yeah.
You're right-clicking the deep dark portal.
Yes. It doesn't do it.
Oh god.
Well, you also might have crashed the server, so give it a second.
Oh no. Nope, server's good. This
The
thing's
server's
just
good, yeah.
useless.
I mean, aren't you supposed to walk on it?
Is that what you do? You walk on it?
I don't fucking know, dude. They changed this shit up.
Oh shit, yeah, you
Wait.
just stand on it. I'm getting very, very sleepy.
Wait, you just have to stand on it, you say?
I'm
Yeah, I
standing
told you
on
that.
it.
Thank you for the intel.
Oh, Jamal, why are you dead? Have fun.
No, not
Dead.
really.
Yeah, you're dead.
No, it's fine. It'll be fine.
I don't know if I feel good about this.
When it happens, don't scream.
If you say pickle Rick and then burp.
I was to answer me to it.
Why does it say I'm in
Oh.
an ocean?
I'm Pickle Rick. Yeah, like that.
Anyways.
Where am I?
You're in the deep dark. Oh, well, if you go into the darkness, you die.
What does that even mean?
Well, you...
Brain
you have
torches.
Torches.
Oh, they break. Don't they break them?
No. Dude, you went there like once. You don't know shit about it. Come on.
Good, man. Okay.
Is this just a place to get stone and cobblestone?
No, there's ore. It's basically just an infinite fucking mine, and if you dig straight down, there's also like a bunch of fucking towns and shit.
For how many of these plates do you need?
Give me about 5.
5 pieces. Okay, well here's 4 here. Let's make another one here. Here's 4 of them. In this. And then the human philosophy. I'm making it random way for it to be done. I'm gonna do what Jamal's doing. I'm gonna see if it takes me the same one.
I'm cheating.
No. Why are you cheating?
Because I have super pickaxe.
I have an actual like. Why this is really weird looking? Oh my god. Should make some torches, shouldn't I? That's my leg. Guys.
Super pickaxe area 10. Maximum range.
Wait 1
5.
second, this might not work. I might need to do something else here.
Oh well, I'll be back in a minute. Also, sorry for the little.
What do you say?
He said, I'm noob killer, I'm noob killer, I'm noob killer, I'm noob killer.
I'm noob killer, I'm noob killer, I'm noob killer. How the hell do I get out of here?
Just go through the portal that you came in from.
I lost the portal.
Jamal, you're literally in a giant fucking mine that's just nothing but stone.
Yeah, but I lost where the portal. Oh, there's gravel too. Oh, hey, I'm
In
taking
theory,
a
there's
lot of
all-
damage now. Oh, okay, because it's too dark.
Like I said, stay out of the dark. But yeah, if you dig straight down, it does lead you to, like, essentially... I'm sure you understand, it's fine.
I mean, right now I'm just cheating it, so.
How are you cheating?
See, admins have this special feature called.
Don't tell me that you're cheating, please.
Fuck you.
Jamal, just think of how you'd react if I were to say it.
Wow, I took a lot of damage. I'm allowed to cheat. I'm a co-owner of the server, technically. I just gotta remember to disable my super pickaxe. Because the last time I didn't, I fucked up. I fucked up my whole house. Oh, I heard a cave sound. Listen to that.
Can you not make the super golden apples anymore? What the fuck?
You mean the notch apples?
Yeah, how do you make those?
I've got no clue. Okay, listen, me cheating is not a common thing. Actually, no, it's a very common thing.
It's just he doesn't want to.
I don't want to admit it. Is that what you just said?
What?
You saying that I don't want to admit it? I don't want to live
You're
up.
asking
Oh
where
god.
the fuck- what's your why?
You
Where-
lied to me. There's no towns directly down.
Wait, did they change that?
Jamal, no, hold on, Jamal. We're just gonna stop talking for a second. Did you just dig straight down like a fucking idiot?
No, I didn't.
'Cause obviously you would have if you followed your death.
No, I used fucking super pickaxe and it just kind of destroyed everything below me.
Yeah, maybe don't
So you
do
mined
that.
straight down. It's almost like
But
I'm
then
using my
again,
hammer.
I
to do
listened
that.
to fruit, which I shouldn't have done.
I mean, as far noob, you remember the deep dark? There were towns down there.
I mean, there was a cavern.
Well, there was also like weird fucking castles and shit.
Was there? I don't remember that. Oh no, I do remember that. I do. Because there was those like beings there that like tried to fucking fiddle with me.
No, there was just regular mobs there.
Well, now that I have a lot of cobblestone, I guess I'm just...
Yeah, but you really
Toss
need
that
your memory
shit.
check, man.
No, there was special things there. I remember there being like spiders and that kind of shit that were weird.
I got 5 green crystal shards and like 20 stacks of cobblestone. It was well worth it, I guess.
Rather than what I've gotten, just cobblestone.
I didn't even see a single ore the entire time I was in there. It's one of those
There we go.
mods.
There's the actual area I'm looking for. Okay. Cool.
Oh, redstone increases attack speed on weapons.
Yes.
That's why you need redstone.
Make a Kappa pixel art? I could one-up the pixel art stuff. Hey, Paul.
Let's make loss.
Time.
Please.
I'm not making loss.
Oh God.
What is it? I kind of want to see what http://loss.jpg leads to. If it,
Nothing.
Oh, it doesn't. Whatever. Somebody should buy that domain, even though I'm pretty sure .jpg is not an appropriate thing.
Why did I click that? Fuck.
I don't think I did it right, but whatever.
Thing's fucking huge. Ow.
How much damage did it do?
Like 2 hearts.
How much does this do?
Like 4 hearts. Wait, I wasn't full health though.
So apparently you can't make notched apples anymore, which is kind of dumb.
I'm pretty sure you still can. Isn't it golden blocks?
No, it doesn't seem to be, because
You can find them, but you can't make them.
it's dumb.
Stop fucking attacking my arm, you
Stop
fuck.
fingering me!
Oh, apple. Fuck.
Yo, apple fuck.
Apple fuck yeah.
How do I add extra reinforcement to a weapon?
Here for it. That one.
I don't think this is working, because usually it says you should be able to stack this 5 times.
Remember, they changed things, so make sure you're looking at a new one.
Calm down.
Sorry.
Calm down.
Indeed.
I need a medpack.
Alright, so I have a question.
What's up?
Wait, actually, let me see if I can figure this out first before I do anything.
I'm gonna go far away in mine in an area that doesn't have underground forest everywhere. Stop attacking my hand, please. Appreciate it if you don't mind.
What version of Tinker's Construct are we on?
Whatever the
I mean,
newest is, I guess.
ow!
Yeah, but it can't hurt that much, and if it does,
she
just
is
add some
fucking-
gloves. It does
Press
not.
gloves. Kitten mittens.
Alright, I
1.1
have the
2.
question.
What's up?
Okay, so I have patterns made of all the things.
Mhm.
How do I actually turn them into casts?
Like items? Okay, so you go to the actual like tool creator that you have, the one that lets you like make like shitty like stone ones.
Yeah.
Okay. So you make a stone one and you put it in like onto the table and then cast it with gold.
Wait, stone. How do I make it stone?
You just put it in the crafting area with it. The part maker.
I don't even have any stone. Hold on, I gotta do
You,
something.
well, you just use mine over the stone. Also, you have a cobblestone generator, you fucking idiot.
So apparently I might need to level up my weapon. I don't know.
Yeah, seriously, I'm a fucking idiot. Let's do the Twilight Forest in mine.
Yeah. Again, there's a shit ton of stuff there that you can go for, man. A few hollowed out hills.
Yeah. Where the hell hills are goddamn cesspool of goddamn ass. Whoa, that's a different loading screen, what the fuck?
Calm down there, angry video game nerd. You crashed.
I crashed actually?
Yes.
Like, what do you mean?
It says you crashed, so.
Oh, it says you left. It might be my fault.
No, it's Twilight Forest. What about dead? That'd be kinda bad. Am I dead?
No.
Didn't say he died.
Give it a second. You probably were
What?
falling. That's the first thing that happens when you go there now.
Wasting out. Oh god. Oh!
No,
Told you.
What the fuck?
Literally told you and you weren't listening.
But doesn't make. So you can no longer go to the toilet. Okay, now I'm just dead. Okay.
No, you can.
What the? That was the most terrifying fucking thing I had to get for experience.
Dude, you don't even lose gear anymore. Why do you care?
But still, that was also awesome experience. That was fucking terrifying, though. Like, oh my god.
So, Waz, you're probably wondering why I'm in the middle of the ocean waiting. Well, you'll see in a second.
Well, hacking again?
Yeah, I'm hacking right now.
Where's a hollowed hillock right here? Holy shit. Jamel, I first probably been in there already, but let's find out. It Jamal's which I've been here, goddammit. So that was. I feel like I was kind of sleepy and I was about to go to bed soon because, you know, I work at 11. But now I'm fully awake because.
That's what modpacks do to me.
No, it's because I fucking fell from the sky like an angel. So does it happen every time you go into the modpack?
No, not every time.
Just sometimes?
Yeah, it's random chance.
I'm guessing it's a bug.
Gee, no, it's not, because have you noticed how high up Oniontown is?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember how portals work? Hey dude, I'm going to the Twilight Forest with you. I hope you don't mind.
That's
Dude,
fine.
this
I'll
suspense
come
of
back
this is
there.
killing me.
What are you doing?
He's trying to blow up my house.
Yes.
Can't trust Jamel. He's trying to kill the server.
I've wanted to own it by myself forever now. Sorry, Paul.
We
Watch
always sort of.
I hope you guys like this hold on screen. I put so much effort into it.
Yeah, I think it's really good, Jamel. I like it a lot.
Thank you.
Alright, dude, we can come to Twilight Forest after I milk some venison. My dear friend, venison. That's right. Hey, yeah. Venison. Yeah, alright. Yeah, that's it.
Some really fucking great suspenseful music for this.
What are you
Also,
doing?
Jamel, when Terry inevitably gets on, don't tell him what happened to him.
What happened to him?
Don't tell him.
I'm gonna go back and make a clip of this specific part and send it to him.
No, but Jamal, what happened? Yeah, there's everything's making it stop. What cat?
Oh, some stuff got taken out, unfortunately. Whatever. I spent most of my weekend making Madoka pixel art because I'm a fucking degenerate.
What cat?
Why can't you just like a good anime? Like, why? Why
I
is
had to
this
bring
so
this
common?
over. This was important.
No, it really wasn't.
No, I'm not going to contribute anything to my cause. I'm going to refill my vape.
What cat?
Dude, what the fuck are you talking to your cat for?
No, I'm saying to make a joke saying because no one's explained to me what the fucking happened to Terry.
What cat?
Oh.
Dude, if I
Don't
tell you,
worry
it'll be a
about it.
spoiler. I don't want to
What?
spoil the surprise
What?
of what I did to Terry's house.
What did you do?
Just don't go to Terry's house.
What's dead rock and why is it so hard to mine? Fruit.
What?
What's dead rock?
Perfect.
Oh, dude. I'm sorry. Though it does sound pretty cool, but I have no idea what Dead Rock is. Let me look it up, though.
There's thorns everywhere, oh shit.
Well, time to go post this everywhere around Oniontown again.
Oh, dude. Don't go. Please. Oh, is that why the server's lagging?
Ah!
Oh, dude, don't go to the acid rain area.
Is there acid? It's acid rain.
Yeah, don't go there. I figured that'd be obvious, but...
Notes
it's-
for wait, a notes on Highland. Explorers book the damage by acid. There seems to be no way to protect myself from the acid. Ruins turn okay, good shit. Fucking lore.
There we go. Oh wait, what am I doing? I need to stay in creative mode so I can make a stack of these. There we go.
Have you watched One Punch Man yet?
Not yet.
Dang it.
You know I've been busy.
Wait, is that a joke?
I'm waiting for you to get here.
Take your time. I'm just
filling
making
my
a few
house with
bricks.
anime posters.
I just had to add some whatchamacallit to my furnace.
Bye, fuckers.
I just didn't even say anything.
Who says my life is a shitpost?
Yeah.
Well, your life is a shitpost.
I'm aware.
Hey, this is accurate. The server didn't crash. I was resting. He's imported spin and then crash.
Yeah, it's because it's only a block tall.
Fair enough.
Well,
Noob, I've noticed a distinct lack of anime girls in your house.
Do you want to fix that?
please go to Terry's house first, actually, Jamal.
Oh god, he'll be mad.
What? What did you find? Well, did you find anything? Please tell me. What'd you find, Jamal?
What do you mean what I find?
You said, well, what would Terry be mad about? I'm just wondering.
You're a fucking madman.
Please help me. Is he creeped out by that?
He was kind of
What?
freaked out by it.
Oh, the
Oh my
cloud?
god. There's more now?
Oh, Jamal, I
Where'd
wasn't
you
talking.
add the
to it
lyrics
the other
in?
night.
Oh, Jamal, I wasn't talking about a cloud.
No,
Clown?
I saw what you did.
Oh, so
Cloud?
you went through the front door?
Oh my god. That's fucking... You're a goddamn sadist.
See what you have? Like, I could replace this whole floor with it.
Clouds?
Now that's just excessive.
Yeah.
Clouds.
I need to go
I'm just
continue my endeavors of. There we go.
Oh shit, I almost walked in for a second. What the fuck was I thinking?
In fact,
Also did not.
it sort of complements art.
Alright, we've been coming through.
I need to find places to put these inside of the server to piss off Terry.
The clouds?
No, not the clouds.
Clouds?
Or the portal?
Clouds.
Oh, no, if you want to know, I'll tell you. I put the portal to the deep dark right underneath the door. This
I
front
know.
door.
I watched that. Watched, like, Jamal walk in there and saw that.
The link that's cut off in the pick a game text field is most likely a link to all the games that I have yet to stream. Nobody's ever tested that feature for me, so I had no idea if it ever actually worked.
What if it works with... Oh, what if the bear walks in there?
It's just a polar bear in the middle of a fucking dark area.
Clouds?
Do we have Vanish on the server? Ah, we don't.
My game crashed again.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. He's in taste player. He's just randomly everywhere.
I gotta fill up Oniontown with waifus. It'll call me Mastaonion for nothing.
God help with it.
So I can't tell you bad news about Tinker's Construct. You can't add extra modifiers anymore.
That's shitty. But balanced, I guess.
Fantastic.
Well, there goes my only use of the Nether Star I could think of.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering what else I could. I kind of found that out earlier. I was kind of. It makes it soul bound, so if you die, you don't lose it. But I mean.
We don't lose it already if we die. It
Yeah.
just takes our inventory.
And these go in my editor chest forever now. Alright, back to
You're mine now. Goodbye.
Whatever, man. We'll just find a way to like create like infinite power or something, and then we can nuke.
I mean, I can do that already. No, I'm gonna work on. I'm generators now. Ooh, here we go. That's a good song.
Oh shit.
No.
These are the two most recent messages. It's just the exact same thing, but 15 minutes later. This really doesn't compliment the music that Noob and I are listening to right now.
You're ruining fucking Commander. What's it called?
Commander Keen.
Keen. Fuck, I'm damn. Holy. What's that RTS game that's actually really good, but no one played? That I first played a lot. Command and Conquer, yes, is it?
Yeah, the person I know that's ever played Command and Conquer is Fusion.
Well, I never played it.
I mean, probably, I don't know. Anders played a lot of games in his heydays. Now, I know what you're thinking. What happened to Andor playing games in his heydays? Well, you see.
This is Mickey. This doesn't feel right.
Redeemed pick a game, and I never changed it off the default thing. Well, I guess. Hold on. Let's go see what was picked the stream.
Oh. So apparently you can make a quantum quarry, mine blocks from a hypothetical dimension that might have existed, requires actuators to get attached to all sides.
Take the shot, Mickey.
Oh, I'm streaming Prison Architect. Oh, there they go. We're gonna pour in.
You're a coward, Mickey. You always were. Goodbye.
Fucking music.
You son of a bitch. You son of a bitch, Goofy.
Guys, I'm such a popular Twitch streamer. I've made 1 bit this whole stream.
Hey! No swearing on my profile! No hex, no bricks,
No double-decker dicks.
Okay?
Good day.
Good night.
God damn it.
Where do I put this stone?
And what's it called? Nether stars aren't really used for a whole lot in this modpack.
I'm gonna fucking scroll down and click a random video according to SynthTube. Here we go.
Infinite wireless transmitter placed in the cable. Ender star, what is it? Unbreakable wand, shape card, silk
Alright, I
quarry.
don't think I'm understanding this yet.
Please tell me.
More, you retarded.
I fucking might as well be. Alright, so I take the stencil, right? God damn it. I regret doing this. How do I make a thing?
Let's say, I'm coming over.
Like, what table do we need?
So you need a stencil table and you need a part builder. You have a part builder?
No, I don't have a part builder.
There you go.
I thought I did.
God, Jamal, you're such a fucking idiot. And like, I can't believe how hard you even breathe being.
Stop yelling at me!
I'm not yelling, I'm mocking. Like,
don't do that either.
Patu. President.
Ninja.
Oh shit, you okay? I think I just pulled a fruit and rolled over my cat's tail with. Oh, give me 1 second.
Way to go, dude.
That's the lowest I've ever taken part
Heartless
of being.
bastard.
Hey,
Fucking
I'm sorry.
cat
Come here.
abuser.
Come here. I'm sorry.
Hey, dude, give me a SynthTube real quick. Let's show some.
I'm under my bed
He's
right now.
consoling his dead cat.
What are you doing with cat?
I rolled over his tail, I think, by accident.
He doesn't.
Like
Dude, it happens. No,
I mean, I did. Come here. It's the first time I've heard it. Please.
This is the first time I heard her.
I'm gonna listen. Cats are very durable. My cat had its head smashed in the fridge door about several hundred times when she was still a kitten, and she's only a little bit crazy.
Come here. Gee,
I don't know why I found that phrase just so funny.
Fruit.
Because, well, you are a sadist,
you.
Jamal.
Fruit, I don't ever want to trust you. Your cat sits there and meows at toilets for hours at end.
That's bathtubs, actually.
Actually, both.
One of
here.
us pays attention.
Come here.
Let me need some information here.
Let me see if I heard you. Come here.
I still just love the fact that you were going Mato
Number
Plato,
one.
present, ninja.
Come here, please. I want to see if I heard you. Paul or something.
I want to make you suffer, Camp.
Get back here. Going the wrong way. This way is where you want to be. Come here. Come here.
Okay, to be
back
the
here.
kind of person I hate.
Get back here before I fucking demolish you.
Oh.
Don't make me stop feeding you.
And Jamal says dab. Dab to dab to dab.
Fuck it, fine. You can.
Dab,
Right.
dab.
You seem fine. You seem fine. Oh god, it's a crawl
Look
back
at
out of the
cool
bed.
Jamal,
Zen
plus attitude,
Do
plus I hate
moves and
Jamal a
dab.
lot.
It's killing me. It's killing me.
How do we
What
get
are you
him to
doing?
stop?
Hey, what are you fucking doing, you degenerate?
Fucking degenerate. I did it. Jamel did the thing that everybody has done already. I'm so good at the game.
I literally had one made about 10 minutes ago.
I did the thing.
I mean, Jamal, you have the materials. What was so hard about this?
Because I can't follow directions, apparently.
Jamal, could you tell me how to dab?
Okay,
You
so
put your
here's what
one.
you do, okay? Let me turn on
Put
my
your
light
left
for this.
arm in.
Alright.
What are the required materials?
I'll teach you how to dab. Okay, so what you do, take your right hand and your left hand, okay? You extend your
Shake it all
hand
out.
like
Do
you're
the hokey
Nazi
pokey.
saluting. Alright? You take your other
I like
hand
that
and do
right
the
now.
same thing past your neck, okay? Put your head going down, and then you go back and forth. That's dabbing. There you go.
What about Clotu Platu? Are they present?
Not right now.
Give Kenny G.
That was my 1 million subscriber face reveal, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.
I've already seen your face too much.
Last time I saw
That's
your,
me.
the second time I saw your face, I spit out. I was telling my coworker about that. I said the mix of betrayal and like loss of trust and
Why did
anger
I
and
just
like
make
disgust.
31 stone sharpening kit things?
Did you hold shift down like
God
a fucking
damn it,
retard?
I'm a retard.
Jamal, you're never gonna get rid of all those unless you throw them in the trash. But somehow managed to
So
get
I'm
back
sitting
in
in the Twilight Forest. Where the fuck are you?
I'm back at my house.
Okay, I guess I'm just gonna explore by myself.
Well, that's
yeah,
cool
okay.
that I have one of those now.
So, Dave, do you want to join me on this thing or what?
I mean, I'm trying to see if I can make a use of these nether storage we have infinite of.
I can tell you one thing that I was gonna use them for, other than the obvious.
It's a good thing I have an
Oh,
infinite
nice.
amount of cobblestone now.
I actually forgot what I was gonna use them for. Shit. There is something. Cool, probably.
I was gonna make an enchanter we can use. Oh wait, if we make we can make evil infused iron with it.
Maybe.
Oh
to
no,
make our
Boss
evil
is cashing
infused
in
iron.
all of his,
Maybe we could make a fucking
Master
miniature
coins
black
now.
hole. They can
Oh,
play
look,
Blue
I'm
Electric.
wasting coins. I think I remember setting that to like 5,000. I mean, at least it's not
Local
scratchers,
collections.
it's something useful.
Blow 2, Blow
I
2.
don't think I own that
Well,
game, though. The rules say you have to provide it if I don't have it.
What game is it?
Don't trust him.
Was put in, oh look, I'm wasting coins.
Was. Make him play the BL. He. Been blowing me off for years.
You want me to stream a game called BLT?
Come on, this is Sonic, right?
Hey, did you
This is
listen
Super
to
Mario.
me?
What do you expect me to be? Some kind of dingus?
Hey, did you do thing too?
What?
Did you get the thing too, dude?
Sure. Come on, you should get to do as well, man.
Oh, no, it's a Hearthstone thing.
Oh, okay, but then.
Unless Jamal gets into Hearthstone, which, I don't know, he could. Probably.
Daily reminder
I'm
that
in.
Woz invited me to host a Hearthstone tournament at his employment.
Who got me that fucking gnome character, you piece of shit.
I could have been a popular Hearthstone announcer, but I don't know anything about the game, so...
it doesn't take that much effort to announce the first
I
time.
mean, you do realize what it would have been if I was a Hearthstone announcer, right? It would
No
have
more
gone
WoW
something
talk?
like this.
I'd go out.
Oh my god.
I can stop now.
Please stop.
I can't move people in chat anymore, so I can't fucking move you.
Hashtag blame Farkas, because apparently he did that.
Wait, can I cheese this as well? Oh my god, I'm making it. Let's see it.
How do you make a stone bowstring?
Carefully.
Alright, I guess I'm just not gonna question it.
Cool Dan's face.
Alright, cobblestone goes in.
Is that correct? 'Cause I haven't played Hearthstone in a while. No boobs.
This is based on the new legendary card that you got from playing BlizzCon.
Maybe we should use that one of this.
It's actually really good.
What does it do?
It's basically he summons a chest, and if you break the chest, it gives you some game-breaking card.
No.
Like,
It's like the ones from like
turn
the...
your entire hand into legendary minions.
Oh.
Let's see if Jamel can figure out how to build something. I wanna make a hammer.
Ooh.
Alright, I need
Amazing.
plates as well.
Oh. Thank you.
Put all space for this.
Oh my god, I can't use this for any more. I need more souls. I need more. More
Oh.
fucking XP.
Hey guys, Jamel's an
Yes.
idiot. Bet you guys never expected to hear that.
Never.
How much gold do I even have in this?
That's incredible.
It's 6 blocks worth. That's I think a good amount of gold. Plate.
Never mind. I think I just wasted some experience. I don't think I can decraft this into anything special.
Also, if you need an XP grind, remember the zombie spawn thing in my fucking area.
Oh yeah.
And also, if you want to be
I know.
really lazy, there's these new
Fine.
items called gold spikes, which whenever a mob falls onto them, they still drop experience.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Alright, boys, Jamel's gonna try to figure something out.
It's personal.
Oh, here goes another game. Waz has requested me to play Dark Souls Prepare to Die Edition.
Hey, look at that. Maybe I should get past the fucking first point.
I'd honestly like to see you play that,
Mastaonion Dark Souls.
Are you actually
Look,
going
Waz,
to
I
play it?
did it from almost 5 years ago. Okay, well.
Did you rest at the bonfire yet, by the way?
Yeah, I did.
That's nice.
Alright.
Those are your checkpoints, essentially. Like,
Yeah, you'll.
Wow.
Also, I like how I haven't posted to my YouTube in a few while.
You can
It should
kill
not
some-
take that
some
much
pop-
energy, but I'm
to
still
open
getting
up these
subscribers
doors.
somehow, so.
oh, it does. Also, look at your face. Look at your beautiful, beautiful face. Now that's my skin.
Get away. Oh, Jesus!
That's what I like to see.
How do I sprint? How do I sprint?
Oh, Jamal, you have to fight it. You
I
have
love
to
how
fight it,
slow
Jamal.
this game is.
I fucking hate people. Ugh.
What?
Ugh. Fuck. No, miss. It's. We're watching a video.
Oh, okay. What can I use blood for?
Hard drink.
Oh, you
Don't
eat it.
blow off my redemptions, you shill.
Actually, you can turn into globs and eat it.
Yeah, it gives you a health boost.
Can I make a plate out of it?
No.
No, I can't.
No. Blood is literally only used for one thing, it's making blood modules or whatever the fuck you call it. There you go. That's just the
Sounds
current
nice.
state of Hearthstone.
Yeah.
Nice little cartoon. I still recommend playing it right now, just because of the like little dungeon run feature.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do it later, like tomorrow or something like that. Because I mean, I've been looking to get it back into it again.
I mean, now's the time because you can get a shit ton of packs from doing dungeon runs.
Time is now.
I didn't build with their skulls.
Well, why? What are you making?
Nether Star Generator. Like last time.
I like how you guys are already fucking years ahead of what I'm doing.
All because of one simple trick. Server mods hate him.
You're talking to the two people who fucking always do the same shit first off in Minecraft.
I can't wait to be playing this mod pack by myself in a few weeks.
I mean, to be fair, in a few weeks, I don't know. Fuck, man.
You better play those 2 games. Technically, I paid over half the price for it.
I mean, Jamal, you're talking to the guy who sometimes starts a WoW sub and then just doesn't play after like 2 days. Because
That's
Jamal makes fun of me.
Huge waste of money.
Yeah, sometimes you just want to get something done, and then you're like, well, nothing else to do because Jamal will yell at me if I play WoW anymore.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not wrong.
Yeah, Fruit, I guess you're not.
Every time I play WoW now, I just hear the phrase, Fruit, I'm gonna fucking break your nose if you keep playing that game. I'm like, please don't.
One of these days, I'm gonna actually die, and you guys are gonna be happy about it.
No.
No.
There's no consequence for dying. I know.
No, Jamal. No. God, Jamal. You got me. You got me. Come on.
Wait, this song.
Come on.
Wind Waker.
Yeah, that's a thought.
I'm gonna say
Which is
Dragon
another
Roost
game I
Island.
never finished.
Is it playing Dragon Roost Island, I'm assuming?
I have the ability to stream Mario Odyssey right now, but I want to finish Galaxy first, but instead I'm playing Minecraft.
Your Switch sits over there and rots like a fucking...
All I did was link.
Also new, Enter the Gungeon just came out for Switch.
What's that?
Enter the Gungeon just came out for Switch, just a heads up.
What the fuck is Enter the Gungeon?
Top-down roguelike, sort of like Binding of
Isaac.
Isaac, but it's a twin-stick shooter that actually lets you shoot in all directions. It's more traditional twin-stick shooter as opposed to Binding of Isaac.
What's Crystal Flux and how do I get it?
There's a lot less customization.
I'm gonna be honest here for a second. You just said a lot of words, and I understood a few of them.
Am I not allowed to eat? What the fuck is going on? But really, it's pretty fucking basic bitch stuff, Jamal. It's just a
What is this
roguelike.
ring? These are rings, okay. Ring of invisibility, or some, how do I see it then?
Just copy Tim Moore and play Prison Architect badly. You don't even have to tell me about that. You know, I ordered a copy of Lego Land, the Roller Coaster Tycoon Lego game knockoff off of eBay to send it to Tim in the P.O. box, but I just haven't sent it because I'm lazy. I guess that makes me like Tim.
But you need more subs to be like Tim.
I need more followers to be like Tim.
And that's a dead
You'd
ass.
actually be a good streamer to be Tim.
Naga, please. I just killed the Naga, by the way. Gives a shit.
I like how Grim was actually trying to convince me earlier that Tim is in Danganronpa.
Oh my god. Danganronpa, you jackass. Anyways.
Alright, what does a hammer do?
Breaks stone faster.
It breaks stone in a 3x3.
I'm done with fucking Minecraft. We crashed games, so...
Allocate more wham.
Oh.
I've crashed 13 times tonight. This is bullshit.
Allocate more dedicated wham.
Allocate more dedicated to
I
Wham.
have fucking 10 gigs of RAM dedicated to this fucking game.
That's probably why it's crashing so much.
Oh, I'm sorry. What should I have then, Smart?
Well, put it at recommended. Because I had
It
it
was
originally at like a lot
It
more.
crashed even more when it was at recommended.
You just gotta find the sweet spot.
This is a load of shit.
Crock of shit, actually?
Same difference, but yeah.
You need more self-esteem to be Tim.
That's where a lot of things are kind of realizing.
Jesus. Goddamn Christ.
Jesus goddamn Christ.
Fucking game, man. Like, I just want to play some goddamn Minecraft and have it not crash every 10 goddamn seconds. Because, oh, I don't know, this mod doesn't work very well.
This is the top part of the party room, and look at that.
Wait, that's good.
Hmm.
I'm remembering everything.
I see.
Stupid.
I can use the top part of the party room to actually make some.
Bowstring.
Ocean man. Shit. Fuck. Okay. God damn, those fucking parrots. The first time I hear that, it always scares shit out of me. Also, like I'm just casually carrying around 2 nether stars in my inventory. I should probably fix that. Okay, good. I'm not gonna fucking lose those shit. It's fucking still a pain in the ass to get.
Yeah, I was about to say maybe in 2018 I'll take a direct focus to completing games. Then I remembered, oh wait a second, the FCC is going to do away with everything. So
You have to buy like a fucking special package just to stream at Twitch.
yeah. Why does nobody have a pair of shears?
JL Shear, haha. I made the joke this time. It was me. I did it.
Oops.
Okay, let's see.
Thank you to the front of Fruit's house for providing me with vines. I'm still wondering what the hell that song was from earlier.
Sounds familiar. What is this from? This is very familiar. Fuck, where's the song? There's a rip of it.
I mean, can you look at this? Can you look at this? Really quick, use look at this.
What's that?
Can you click this video?
Click the video, what?
The video and subscribe. Can you click it?
Yeah, that's just not. No, fine.
Jamel's understander in the mod pack.
Let me make a fucking lumber axe or something.
I'm trying to make a bow so I can shoot things.
I've actually never made a bow in Tinker Contract. He returns.
I'm guessing bone arrow would be made with bone.
You correct matey. So, buddy, to make like bows like arrows, it's kind of a pain in the ass from what it looks like. You need to make a bowstring, an arrow shaft, and fletching and that kind of stuff. Which means fletching you need to make like leather and that kind of shit.
Right now, I need a good bow.
Let me know because I mean,
enchanted to be cool. Also,
you
was
can't
you probably
enchant these
don't
things.
understand the significance of this Minecraft stuff. This is the original Minecraft server we played on in 2010. Ported
it's
over
not.
to modern Minecraft, and then we modded the fuck out of it. Look at this secret shit. Whoa, bam! Oh, so cool.
That's delayed. This is Jamal says delays in the club. He's pulls his deck out. As left the secret stuff. Well, bam!
That's the only way you can get famous on Twitch now, is you have to get posted on live stream fail showing a dick. I think there's been a penis displayed on my stream at least once or twice.
Whole time's been marred. Well, says screaming.
I mean, you wouldn't look a lot during the nighttime things at the LAN party. But in that scene where I like walked into the room with my pants on, I was just sort of like free balling.
I think the thing that will always make me wonder is what you were doing. Do you remember being up and like standing around like everyone was sleeping?
Dude, we bring this up at least once a week.
Like, I just want to know.
No.
I don't get it. Like, I mean, because we both like I slept walked the night before that.
I know, dude, but I had to clean up a lot
What?
on my face.
What? I said
The only thing I want to know about that night is who the fuck farted.
It's falling.
I still think you guys are imagining that.
There's no way that we all
collaboratively,
could have imagined that
we
the morning
collaboratively-
after, as soon as we all
Well, see,
woke up.
Noob, I know for a fact, has a terrible memory. Noob will just remember whatever the fuck you tell him to remember.
I know for a fact
Oh my
that happened,
God.
man. You farted
That's not
directly
true at
into my
all.
asshole.
I'm personally offended.
I'm pretty fine that you said the fact that I remember anything you tell me to.
I mean, you're
That's
not wrong.
I'm completely wrong.
Your memory is very fucking moldable.
Flimsy.
Oh.
No offense, just true.
No, I just want to fit in, so I'll say yeah, I remember that, so people don't make fun of me.
Oops. Wing, wing. Bug Stomper, stomp, stomp.
I just found a hedge maze in the Twilight Forest.
I just realized my heartburn went away. Means you guys haven't
Bring it back
made me
and
mad
forth.
for a few hours.
Proud of you, Jamal.
Congrats on
He laughed.
overcoming your heartburn.
See?
Stop making me giggle at farts.
I really do that, Jamal. It's more of a personal issue with you. Don't look at self-respect.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Look at my eyes, they blink. Isn't that creepy?
How do you do that?
You can open up your inventory and the little thing that has your eye, like your head. You can
Yeah.
edit your stuff on there, and you can
do you
assign
add,
yourself
like-
to have eyes. I can give myself anime eyes if I wanted to.
How do you manage that?
What do you
Head
mean,
or
how do you
head
manage
width?
that?
No. No parts.
Yeah, it's
Eyes. Oh god.
I can also turn myself into a spider.
There we go. That's perfect. And just turn it to purple. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. Oh god, you can have one eye, one. Oh god, that's fucking weird. There we go. Perfect.
There we go. I'm beautiful. Oh yeah, I need to get myself bunny ears too. Get myself fucking Wolverine claws, why not? There we go. Look at me, I'm fucking gorgeous. Would you guys make love to this? Because
No.
I know I would. What the fuck am I doing? Just don't question it, build. It's perfectly natural.
I don't think any human would ever say that.
I won't send me to scream and say, "What the fuck are you doing in my house?"
What the fuck are you doing, Fruit? I'm too tired for this shit. I do not blame you. Oh yeah, you can also, where is it? Oh, it's scale. Can I give myself a huge hit? Oh. Oh. Oh.
Something hot air.
Oh god, the height actually adjusts. I'm turning myself into
Yeah, your
fruit.
butt, yeah.
I don't know how you guys do it exactly. I mean, basically always playing is that midget from Borderlands 2.
Oh god. This is hurting my head. Can I make myself look like an anime girl? I will try, damn it. Oh, actually,
God.
speaking of anime girls, how do I go in the first person? There we go. Oh god, I'm so tall now. I made that. It's pixel art.
You wanted a spider's resource.
You know what? I'm gonna
Okay, I need the.
make something that
this. My
Fruit
head
also
hurts.
probably would enjoy.
There we go.
I'm making a lumber axe, but I'm making with demon.
Alright, I
Love
am
it, demon.
tasked with making myself look like an anime girl.
Jamal always never stopped to ask if he could. He never asked if he should.
Yeah. Oh wait, I can give myself tits, that's right.
Never think I'd see Borderland faggotry, let alone create it. Okay.
I feel bad for anybody who's joining the stream right now.
Yeah,
to
'cause we
witness
just-
this.
I feel bad for anyone that's ever joined the stream, to be honest.
Oh, I gotta give myself a neckbeard as well. That was sad. I think we're witnessing the sad part right here.
No, I mean, a Mastaonion, it's a collaborative effort of just sadness all the time. Borderline garbage at any point of the night.
Wolf just joined the stream saying, "What the fuck are you doing?" What's up, Wolf? I was tasked to make myself look like an anime girl. Gotta have the big pink eyes. Yeah. Gotta have the glint. Nice! Do anime girls have fins?
No.
Depends if you watch the good ones or not.
Big anime titties, you weep. Anime girls have mullets, right? Yeah, fuck it, yeah, okay. Color. Yeah, fuck it, I'm gonna have highlights. There we go. Orange. I'm a succubus now, apparently.
I mean, is there a way to find, like, other fucking
Help?
things? But
Is there a way to find help?
No, what was it for?
I'm trying to find, like, a fiery swamp. Where the fuck do I go?
Oh yeah, I forgot.
I fuck about
How
now.
could I forget the most important part?
The degenerate making it?
You making fun of me?
You're
Yes.
making fun of me. Jamal, do you have any reeds I can steal?
I might. What if I turn myself into?
I'll put your autism is lagging the server, I think.
Please, Jamal, you're actually lagging the server. I need you to stop.
That's not
dude.
me. Oh, dude, nice. Okay. Wings. I could just go to Planet Minecraft and save myself embarrassment, but that's not what this stream's about.
Making my friends look like retards being friends with me.
Do I want to have angel wings, fly wings, or fairy wings? gonna say fairy wings.
It scares me to this day that you call yourself a weeb. What happened, man? I don't
really
even call
don't know
myself
anymore,
fucking
man.
weeb, but actually,
Yeah, never since I think I'd see Jamal be like, that's kind of weird.
Don't quote Half-Life anymore.
No.
we're gonna edge you off, Jamal. Like, do it in Gold Source.
Man, I can fuck those.
Where do I get magical wood?
I'm guessing the Twilight Forest. Oh god.
Where's it from?
Should I make myself thick and juicy?
Biomes of plenty.
Good luck with that.
You don't look like an anime girl, you look like a special squirrel. Skin URL. I wonder. Wait, sounds. I could make myself a goblin? Oh, never mind, I can't do that. Well, there I go.
There he goes. There he is.
Bill's saying he broke me. Dude, look at my tits. Look at. Oh, I'm giving you an upskirt of my Minecraft skin. I have 2 dicks that come out of my asshole.
So do you think 3 modifiers is worth the chance of randomly breaking at any point?
What do you mean?
So magical woods thing has a random chance of breaking when it takes damage. Can break unbreakable tools. But it's magically modifiable with 3. You get 3 modifications.
Go for it.
I mean,
Just don't prevent something that you don't use as often. Or don't make a rapier out of it.
I was thinking of making an axe. I got a wood axe out of it.
What the fuck was I doing before I started that?
Change contract.
Gotcha. It's all coming back to me now.
I remember what I was doing now. I was making fucking evil, wasn't I?
Stream Minecraft once and lost 10 subs.
Oh, I need. So I finally tuned the Mastaonion.com.
So I finally caught a Mastaonion live stream.
He sat there for 4 hours.
He sat there for 20 minutes making himself look like an anime character, made himself look like a semen demon squirrel.
A evil semen demon girl.
With antlers and a bunny snout.
Okay, the first things first, I need to make a... Okay, I see how this... Yeah, I have plans.
I think your issue, Eli, is you didn't dab enough. You didn't build a functional fidget spinner with the pistons.
Well, I feel like I know what happened to you.
What is that?
You've lost your mind.
I feel like you basically just thought of all the things you hate, and now you're doing them ironically, but you don't. Like,
you don't quite realize it.
Like,
I haven't become as self-aware yet.
It'd be like if you just if you started playing WoW and said, "Oh my god, I love this game," and you made like a fucking female night elf and started beating off to her or something.
You caught me. That's exactly what I do.
Worse, that's entirely something Jamal could do.
That's the thing. This is like him liking anime. This is like him all of a sudden like doing all this shit. It's like this weird ironic thing that not even he knows why he's doing it.
You guys
that
caught
one time
I
walked in Jamal's room when he was streaming, making a joke. He looked over and just quietly whispered.
What was that? I didn't hear you over the sound coming. Okay, there we go. As it turns
And then-
out,
and then-
the real
and then I'm
Jamal
like,
was
what?
killed
And
off
then-
years ago, seasons ago.
And I'm like, what? And you just go, yeah, memes. I love them. I love anime girls. Yeah, I want to fuck them. And I'm like, oh no, it's too late. I'm too late.
And yet he still won't play Brutal Legend, god damn it.
We have to request it, silly. Why
I
just
have
did
been.
3 game requests?
I have been for
It
years.
has to go through the formal appeals.
I mean, I doubt you're even gonna do I doubt you're.
Listen, when people
I don't know.
donate their hardly earned Mastacoins, I will do things.